All right, we are live. I believe there's about a 30-second delay, so what we're saying now will show up in about 30 seconds. Currently, LSU UCLA 7-14, and looks like Georgia might be about to score. Let me see if everybody can hear us okay, see us okay. Let us know what you got. These always take a minute to get going.
It's been a heck of a football weekend so far, and a heck of a Saturday too. It feels like everything's kind of gone a little bit different than maybe was anticipated.
Awesome. Yeah, we are live, looking pretty good. So just to get things going, Josh, I want you to talk about this because we're watching currently 4th and goal. Looks like Georgia is ahead of Clemson at this point in the season so far. What we've seen today, Texas A&M struggling, obviously Georgia, Clemson struggling, Wisconsin, Penn State. We saw a lot of offenses except for Alabama and Oklahoma and Tulane struggle today. Josh, could this be the seniority that we talked about all week in our previews of this being an uncharacteristically, historically senior season for everybody out there? And that's why right now the defenses look to be well ahead of the offenses.
I think so. I kind of wonder how much of it is a reversion to normal, right? We're all used to seeing the offenses dominate because that's all they did last year, it felt like, for the most part. And now all of a sudden, offenses are playing more like they're supposed to be playing. And I think that's kind of, it might be throwing us off a little bit in terms of our expectations of what these teams are like. So I think that's a big part of it. I also think another big part of it is early in the season. And I feel like every year, as long as I followed college football, at the beginning of the year, everyone thinks college football is terrible and all the teams are terrible. And it takes like 6 months to get going. I think last year sort of put a weird spin on it because the defenses were so bad. We saw a lot of points, right? And a lot of times people see points scored as good football. And kind of reverting back to where defenses are ahead of the offenses is a double whammy because now your early football, there was a lot of turnover with big teams with quarterbacks and skill position players. And you combine that with the fact that defenses are actually playing well again. And it feels like, everybody's bad. Or at least feels like the major guys are bad. They're still winning most of these games. They're just not winning by the margins people were hoping they would.
So Trent said, and I'm going to take this one. He said, "Is Clemson's offense more on them or great UGA defenses?" I think it's both. I think we're seeing, I don't want to get too much picking on the Big Ten because I think Ohio State looked pretty good offensively once they got going. And Iowa looked awesome today, although some of those points were on defense. I'm a little frustrated by what I saw in Penn State and Wisconsin, and I'm not seeing as much of that in this game where there's actual creative play calling that Clemson's doing to try to get DJU going. Georgia's doing a lot of good football in space, and Clemson is not taking advantage of the house blitzes that are coming. I think they're rattled at quarterback, Clemson. I think they're not great on offensive line. And I think that Georgia's defense is just really freaking good right now. But Clemson's defense is looking better than I expected.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that's happening in that game, in my opinion, is that Clemson's offensive line is not handling Georgia's D-line. And we talked a lot in our preview that the interior linemen in this game were some of the best in college football. And I think in Clemson's case, we knew they had kind of an issue with center, and that position was unsettled going into this game, and they just can't handle Georgia's interior line, and there's pressure up the middle the whole time, and Clemson can't run at all. And I think the combination of those factors is rendering their offense pretty impotent. I mean, a lot of people are going to talk about how their quarterback's being ineffective, but I don't think it's on Uiagalelei very much. I mean, he's had some rough plays, but that's what happens when you're getting a lot of pressure. It's more, to me, the receivers aren't particularly open, and the interior is getting pushed. So it's always a combination of the two. That wouldn't happen if Georgia's defense wasn't good. But at the same vein, I also think it's a little bit the fact that Clemson has enough deficiencies that can sort of be harped on.
So Metcalf said Bryce lived up to the hype, and y'all let us know. This is a new format for us. We found a platform that actually kind of eliminates a lot of our technical issues that we always have with live shows, but we're trying to involve y'all in the chat on the screen, and this helps us really kind of talk through awesome interception from LSU right there. Bryce lived up to the hype. Yes, I thought he looked really good. There was some concerns for me a little bit. It was hidden by all the numbers and the fact that there was never really a game there in terms of competition, but the offense sputtered a good bit. And I think part of it was because the defense or the run game really didn't get going for Bryce. And there were a lot of times that Kirk mentioned a couple of times here that DJ is not running. He's scrambling to pass. Bryce Young did that a lot today, where he had 8, 10, 12 yards in front of him that he didn't take because his eyes were upfield looking to throw. And I felt like he looked pretty good, but there were some times where the game was moving a little too fast for him. What do you think about what you saw from Alabama's offense today? I know we're nitpicking. They could have scored 60 if they wanted to, but if we're going to nitpick, what did you see?
I thought obviously they were good. They moved the ball effectively. I thought they were a little clunky, even though they scored as much as they did. It felt like they got their points in big chunks after they kind of would struggle to move it a little bit. I agree with you that I felt like Bryce Young didn't look 100% comfortable. I mean, he played well. I mean, he definitely played well, but I didn't feel like he was taking the easy play as much as he maybe could have, given how the game was going. And overall, I mean, it's hard to be too negative given the fact that they shut it down early. But I will say also early in the game, I didn't feel like the run game was particularly effective. And it was a little bit what we both thought. Like Brian Robinson is a solid back, but he's not the kind of back they've had in recent years, and that the pop and explosion isn't there. So I'll be curious if they do better with one of the other young guys that they have behind him.
Real quick, because I know you've got a lot of thoughts on this, and they are the same thoughts that I have. What's wrong with North Carolina? I'm just going to step back and let you take this because I know exactly what you're going to say.
Well, what I'm going to say with North Carolina is, well, there's two things with North Carolina. When we did our top 10 preview, I even said, look, North Carolina is going to have stupid losses. It's Mac Brown's had them in his whole career, but more importantly, it's something that's always happened with Phil Longo and his offenses. So Longo's offense is very feast or famine. It's built where they're going to take a lot of deep shots, and they're going to try to run in like a zone read run game and then throw over the top with RPO slants underneath. And what they don't really have is a traditional passing offense or something that allows them to try to have the consistent play. So if things aren't working with those Hail Mary shots, their offense tends to break down. And we saw that for years with Longo when he was at Ole Miss, because he got hired from Ole Miss or to Ole Miss from a really small school. And they had some good numbers at times, but they were massively inconsistent. And when they were at North Carolina the past few years, they had two high-level NFL wide receivers, two high-level NFL running backs, and they were able to really capitalize a lot of those boom and bust plays. I mean, they had home run hitters backed up by home run hitters. And I think what you're seeing is an offense that just doesn't have quite as much depth in that regard, and they're struggling a little bit more. And I'm going to step off camera for just a minute. I got to fix a lighting issue.
Lighting problems. Okay, I can handle this one. Buckeye thoughts. The single high safety thing, we've talked about that for a couple of years now, where we've got some concerns. And the problem really flows through linebacker issues. They were able to cover it a little bit last year, but it's showing up this year. It showed up in 2019. Linebacker issues are a problem, and they're having to, in terms of supporting the run game, really walk that guy up. And it does make them susceptible to a couple of things, and one of them is the RPO slant. But really, in general, anything over the top with anybody that's got some length at wide receiver that can really, go vertical. I think there's been some problems there for a while. There's some concerns. I do think we've seen this from Ohio State, though, in the past, where they use these early games to prime what they need to sort out, and they sort it out over the course of the year. Nobody's really going to challenge them. Maybe Michigan looked decent today. I don't want to jump too much on that because we saw what they did to Minnesota last year, and then we overreacted. But I liked what I saw, and we're going to talk about this in our Oregon preview. We are doing a preview, y'all. One of the things that I felt like was Ohio State wanted to go into this game and not show a lot, and not show schematically what they were going to do to get Olave open and Wilson open for these shot plays. They wanted to win with a pretty vanilla offense. They couldn't do it. Minnesota was better than that, and they ended up having to really kind of open it up in the second half. So I think that Ohio State is better than they showed Thursday night, but there are definitely some concerns. That doesn't mean they can't work them out come playoff time. Josh, everybody's killing DJ Uiagalelei. Can you talk a little bit about really what this Clemson, the gap between how great Georgia's defensive line or front seven is versus really some deficiencies that Clemson has offensively on the offensive line?
I knew people were going to do that because the passing game's not working well, and everybody always blames the quarterback. There's a little bit there, and Daniel, do you agree with me? I think it's like 20% Uiagalelei and it's 80% offensive line and receiver problems right now.
Yeah, I think it's because they're also not able to run the ball, and that should tell you right there. Like there's nothing they can do for DJ right now, like to give him any kind of breathing room.
I forget the stat, but I think they have negative rush yardage a minute ago when I looked. And look, if a team has negative rush yardage, you can't put that on the quarterback. And that's a problem with the offensive line. I don't mean little rush yardage where the other team's stacking it up. That means they're in the backfield constantly. And when I was watching a couple of plays where they were really trying to open it up at the end of the first half and trying to pay attention to the receivers, he's just got nowhere to throw either. I mean, his guys are not getting open and they're not getting separation. We talked a little bit about the fact that they might be missing like Amari Rodgers or Powell. And I think people kind of shifted that to the side and disregarded it. These other receivers, Lansden or Ngata, I mean, they're big, powerful receivers, but they're not getting separation. Like their guys are not really in any way leading the Georgia corners. They can't get over the top on the Georgia corners, so they can't drop it over the top. And what that really means is you're really stuck because Georgia is collapsing the pocket from the outside. They're pushing it very easily with Davis and their interior linemen. And the only way you can, negative 19 rushing yards. The only way you normally combat that is you have guys go deep and you just try to throw it over the top. Because usually when teams are being that successful, they're crowding the line of scrimmage and you've got some holes at the second level. Georgia's doing it without heavy blitzing. So they're able to take away with linebackers those intermediate passing lanes, and the receivers don't have the speed to get over the top on Georgia. There are not many defenses Clemson's going to see that are better than Georgia, but I don't know that you could put almost any quarterback in this situation will be successful. If you put Bryce Young in that situation, if you put Trevor Lawrence in this situation, maybe that's a good point. Would you agree, Daniel, that what's going on right now with DJ Uiagalelei is really not dissimilar to what happened to Trevor Lawrence in the playoff game last year, only really even worse in terms of the domination by the receivers and defensive line?
Yeah, because I think we've seen a couple of plays here where if there was a Trevor Lawrence, he would have done something with his legs. And when you have these rollouts or pocket bails and he gets 7-8 yards and he keeps his offense on the field, that is a aspect that you touched on in our preview that you got killed for, in that you said DJ's not really a runner, and this is something that they're going to miss. And I think they've missed it tonight. Here's a good one just to kind of shift gears to some earlier talk. I'm going to talk on it and I'll let you talk on it too. Thoughts on Texas today. I thought that, look, I think Louisiana is a decent G5 team. I think that there was a little bit of overhype on them coming in. So I don't want people to overreact on Texas. But the thing that was good for me was to see that they didn't really sputter. It wasn't super like bombs away early, but they created comfortable separation second, third quarter. And that's what you want to see. And I think, honestly, I would have forgiven them if they won a 28-21 kind of game. I wouldn't have been upset about it. So really, this showing today from Texas, I think, is about as good as you could expect. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we don't really know how good Louisiana was, and the two of us were never as high on Louisiana as a lot of the national pundits were. They got a lot of credit last year for beating Iowa State, and then everybody's schedule got super isolated, and they still, they still lost a game. I mean, they were not an elite team, I think, by any measure, or any application of it. And I think the 23 ranking this year was a little perspective. I don't know if we're going to find out Louisiana is a fantastic team, but Texas still beat them by 20 points. And more importantly, Texas had 10.7 yards per attempt. And we've talked for the past however many years with Tom Herman, Ellinger's yard per attempt numbers were always pedestrian. I mean, he'd have a ton of 6-7 yard per attempt games, which just really isn't getting the job done. Even if you have a high completion percentage, you're not getting enough yardage to matter. And I mean, the short version of it is they ran the ball well enough to be effective. I mean, like 5 yards a carry by the main backs. Bijan Robinson didn't really break loose, so to speak. But the passing game had a lot of chunk plays without massive explosives. And that's a bit what we saw with Sarkisian in his previous stops. And I think it's promising for Texas. I mean, they look like a coherent offense and a coherent team. And even if Louisiana is not a world beater, I still think they're decently good. And Texas just wasn't beating teams like this 38-18 in the recent past. So it's very encouraging.
So there's a couple of comments, Bruce and a longtime fan of ours, Tijuana, about Oklahoma and where everybody would be ranked. Tremendous defense from UCLA right there. Look, Oklahoma's not going to drop that far because who are you going to put in front of them? North Carolina's out. Indiana's out. Like Iowa looked good today, but they're not going to move. They probably won't move up in the top 10. So one of these, Clemson and Georgia, is going to lose. And I don't know, like, look, I think that the calculus of offensively both of these teams changes tremendously if they play in Oklahoma, given what we saw Oklahoma's defense today. But I don't know that the loser of this game, like, that's tough. And here's a good question. This is something I'll put to you, Josh. Like, we always talk about, we care about how you play, not necessarily wins or losses. Given what you saw from Oklahoma today, is it fair if this ends up being, let's say, 13-7? Is it fair to drop the loser of this game behind Oklahoma? Because if you swap them and say, if Oklahoma played like they played against Tulane, would they have beaten the winner of this game? And if not, why do we punish the loser just for the L?
Yeah, I mean, that's always been our beef with a lot of rankings is Tulane had a dangerous offense. I mean, we talked about that on Twitter a little bit. They weren't the scrub that some people want to make them out to be, but they also didn't have a very good defense, and they're not an elite team. And the way Oklahoma played inconsistent football, the way that Oklahoma's offense in particular sort of sputtered, means if they were playing a team like this, I don't think they would be able to win, more than likely. So I don't think it's fair to say that you played a big out-of-conference game when Oklahoma was playing Tulane, and because you lost that game in a close game and Oklahoma managed to barely eke out a win against Tulane, that they should be ranked ahead. I think that logic's a little silly. A W is a W. I get that. At the end of the day, we talk about it's if you beat a team, you have to assume the way I view it is right. Like when I'm projecting outward, I look and say, what are the odds that you might beat this other team that somebody else played? But when I'm looking inward, if you beat the number one team in the country and it's a fluke, I'm going to just sort of, in my mind, say, okay, but if you played that game 100 times, you win 100 times because you beat them. And that's the end of it. But when you barely beat Tulane, if I'm looking about how you're going to play, a Clemson or Georgia or LSU or whoever, I am going to take that into account, and I don't know that they would necessarily have beaten one of those teams today.
Someone asked about Michigan. It's a little up the line. I'll say a couple of things. One, I hope Ronnie Bell's okay. Like, he was having a game. He had an offensive pass interference call on a catch that, if they don't call that offensive PI, it's the catch of the year in game one. And then he had the long touchdown, and then he got hurt on, I think, a kick return. I hope he's okay, because I think a lot of what he brings to that offense is kind of what they need. Having said that, I was excited to see a little bit more dynamic offense from Michigan. It took about a quarter and a half, 2 quarters before they really started doing that. And maybe it was a similar situation where they were trying to hide some of it. But Josh, do we like, other than the fact that, yes, you got to like, was it like 38-7, 38-14 win? Do we like what we saw from them enough to feel good about putting them in the top 15? Or is it still a fool me once situation with Michigan, given what happened, last year with the Minnesota game or years past where they've beat some teams but not been great down the stretch?
I mean, the reality is it's Western Michigan. I liked what I saw in the fact that they looked a little more functional at times, and the quarterback position looks steady. And like with Shea Patterson in those years, they just couldn't really get anything going on a consistent basis. And it felt like they could lose to almost anyone. And they'd have a hard time in close competitive games because of that inconsistency. But I still think, because of the nature of the opponent you're playing and where they're overmatched in a lot of respects, it's hard for me to draw too much from that, because I'm not sure that they're going to be able to, run the ball overly effectively and do those sorts of things they want to be able to do in a lot of other games.
So if we're talking about rankings, is it just a mess right now? And this is a better question. Forget about rankings. I was listening to Josh Pate yesterday. He did a bit on how he's kind of changed his perception of the 2007 season, and now he's kind of excited for it, potentially. Based on what you saw today, does it have, other than Alabama being pretty stable, does it have a 2007 kind of feel where it's just, there's no way to rank anybody, it's going to be upset city all year? Like, did you get that kind of feel, or is this just more week one and everything will kind of settle down to the mean at some point?
I feel like it is week one. We have top 10 upsets all the time in week one. This was just a more normal week one. And I think something that also probably made it feel a little weirder was our week one was so staggered last year, right? Like, so many conferences started in different weeks. You didn't have everybody new all at the same time. And it made, it made things feel kind of like more stable, because you didn't see upsets on certain weeks. But when you have all the conferences all starting at once, we gloss over the games like Alabama, Miami that are like well in hand, and the games that are upsets get our attention, and all of a sudden we're paying attention to the near losses. Now, it feels like there may be a little more close games than normal, but I don't know. I'm always hesitant to take week one and assume that it's going to be a massively disruptive year, because this really does happen every year, and we always kind of overreact a little bit. And I've kind of learned not to, or at least to try not to.
So we saw Fresno give Oregon all they wanted today. And I will say that a lot of that didn't happen until Thibodeau went out, and defensively they started getting a little, off kilter. But what concerned me more was, I don't think, and this goes back to the bowl game with Iowa State last year, I don't think Oregon's got a quarterback, which is weird to say, but I've watched enough of them to really not feel great about their offense, and coming up against Ohio State, who may not have a good consistent offense, is going to hit enough explosive plays to put 30 points on the board. Are you concerned? Not a mini preview, but are you concerned about Oregon in that regard?
Totally. The moment they announced Anthony Brown was the starter, I was skeptical, because I've seen him play for years we watch a lot of college football, and I've watched a lot of Boston College when he was there, and he wasn't good. I think he's a good leader. I think he's a good runner. He's not a good passer. And for Oregon to do what they want to do and the style of offense that they want to play, I don't think you can do that with Brown. I just don't. And that showed up, I think, in the Fresno game. Maybe I'm going to have to give it a little more thought, but maybe Ohio State, you end up with a matchup where they can run the ball with him. But yeah, I don't think he's the kind of guy to make you a top 5 team. Let's turn that conversation, because there's a million people asking these questions. What do you think about these top teams that are struggling? I mean, the one you have there's Oklahoma, but the other one I'd like to turn to maybe is Ohio State.
I think some of that is week 1, but right now, here's what scares me for this football season. And we saw this last year, and we talked about this last year, where we gave a lot of COVID semi-mulligans in week 1, week 2, or whatever. But you know who didn't look COVID rough? Alabama, and they won it all. You know who didn't look COVID rough early on? Ohio State, and they were right there in the national championship game. So, yes, I think a lot of these top teams, what's Florida doing offensively today? What is Texas A&M doing offensively today? These are teams that were supposed to be the ones that gave Alabama a run for their money, or right there at the end of the year. And looking at Georgia, I think their defense is fantastic. It was fantastic last year, and Alabama put up a 40 burger on them. So I have some concerns. I want to see the teams that are dominant, even if it's against crappy teams. I'm going to get excited. So if Ohio State wins, 31-7 next week, then I'm going to start getting excited that we're not going to see Alabama again this year. And for me right now, even though I can pick on some things from Alabama, there's nothing from anybody I've seen so far that says, okay, we got some other contenders. Here's what I think, Josh, and this is what I'd like for you to weigh in on. I think we're going to overreact from week 1. What I'm hoping is that we don't have a contender slip up so bad early that they lose, when otherwise throughout the year they would have matured enough to really give an Alabama run for their money, like in Oklahoma. I'll let you kind of touch on that.
It's an interesting conversation piece. I mean, this was sort of the question in 2007, right? Is what happens when everybody has a stupid loss, then you get chaos, and it's fun throughout the year because everything seems to matter and every game seems to have stakes. But I do agree with you. I'd kind of hate it if some of the best teams have stupid early losses when they're maturing, and then what we end up with at the end of the year isn't necessarily the best teams. It's just teams that play their harder games late, or teams that got the jump early. That's the nature of college football, though. I'll be honest. I don't think that bothers me as much maybe as it does you, because I feel like, all right, if you get the stupid loss and you kind of deserve it. I'm a little more concerned with if we take the Clemson Georgia loser and we bounce them out of the discussion, or people want to bounce them out of the discussion due to that loss, when a lot of other teams don't take those kind of risks. Same thing I would say with Oregon playing Ohio State. I mean, if Oregon gets blown out in the Ohio State game, I'm not very apt to be massively critical of them.
I did think Burke looked pretty good, and I do think that it's worth noting that Ohio State was down some guys to start that game. I liked Burke in that game. I thought that other than the one pass interference where he was completely outmanned, he held his own and he was thrown in the fire. I like that. I think Ohio State will be really good by the end of the year. What I saw from Stroud, though, I'm not sure that they're going to be. I don't think they're going to be as good offensively by the end of the year as they were last year with a seasoned Justin Fields, which means they need to be better defensively, which is right now. I'm not saying they won't. I'm saying it's an incomplete. We don't know. All right, so let's talk a little bit about. I know we're watching LSU UCLA right now. So we got dragged by LSU fans this week, and we are absolutely, unless LSU puts up 30 points in the second half, we are absolutely going to let them know about it. We picked UCLA to win this game. We said it could go either way. We said 10 times they play, there's going to be blowouts on either side. It's like it's super hard to pick this game. We stuck our neck out both and picked UCLA to win this game and got dragged all week because we don't watch enough. We don't watch enough LSU. We don't know what we're talking about, blah, blah, blah. But isn't what we've seen so far about what we expected?
Sure as heck looks like it. I mean, we toot our own horn some just to the fact that I feel like we have to defend our credibility sometimes. But man, did I get taken to task for being critical of LSU in a lot of ways. And this game looks exactly like I thought it would. I think UCLA was a grossly underrated defense. I think they're playing really well. They're really exceptionally senior laden. I don't know if people saw the stat, but it's 4 fourth-year starters, 5 fifth-year starters, and 2 sixth-year starters on defense. Every defensive player is a senior. Some are fifth-year seniors and some are sixth-year seniors, all returned. That's not just rare, it's unprecedented, right? Because you didn't used to have 6-year players. So it's giving LSU a lot of problems. And yeah, LSU's been able to move the ball some, but not enough. Max Johnson is not quite consistent enough. And more importantly, I thought Johnson's actually exceeded my expectations, but their offensive line is just not great. And when Deculus went out at right tackle, I think it actually really hurt them because they were already hit, like we talked about, and kind of got dragged on in a comment on that YouTube video. The left tackle there has transferred to Kentucky. That was Dare Rosenthal. And they didn't really have another left tackle, but they're trying to make do. Now they don't have any tackles. And so that kind of, it kind of puts them in a lurch, but I think, it's 50-50. I mean, they're not the world's greatest team. They're not a bad team, but, UCLA is actually a pretty darn good team. And I think people just didn't want to accept that.
So we got a super chat from Matthew Miller. I want to say thanks for that. And I think it's a good question too. 2 questions. So the ACC, I think, is actually going to be a little bit better this year. Clemson's O-line they're okay. Georgia's defensive line is elite. But okay for Clemson should be unacceptable at this level, having this much success. They shouldn't have an okay offensive line. Josh, I don't know how much Texas you got to see today. I don't know what you think about Hudson Card, but I thought, first start, can't complain. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is I caught snippets of the game live, and I'm not going to lie, I kind of feel bad about that, trying to answer this question, at least the first half of it. I can answer the second half better. I mean, the highlights and the parts I saw was that he was doing what he needed to do. I mean, Sarkisian likes to create matchups and open guys, and the best thing I can say about Hudson Card is that he operated that offense, right? When they had a misdirection and they got running back or a tight end flowing the other way, he hit him. And that efficiency paired with what they were trying to do offensively made things work. A lot of his best plays in that game were within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. And people love to talk about how good Sam Ehlinger was or how heady he was. He missed a lot of easy plays. He did. And I think if they can get more efficiency on those plays where they can leverage the fact that they have a huge talent advantage in a lot of ways at Texas, right? I mean, they've got great skill players at Texas. They've got great athletes at Texas. And if you can get them the ball on a consistent basis and let them just try to get you an extra 3 or 4 yards every time, you're going to win a lot of games in the Big 12. And then the second half of that was the ACC question. Does the ACC really rise and fall with Clemson? I don't know, but I think it certainly makes things more open if Clemson has major offensive line issues because you can disrupt them now. And they're used to really having their way. And this was our point in the top 10 and the previews. Everybody wants to focus on Trevor Lawrence. People did not pay enough attention to how much Travis Etienne made their running game go, which made everything else work. And without Etienne, it's not just the O-line. Etienne would produce regardless of the O-line and make them an all-around complete team. And what you're seeing is a team that can get exposed a little bit. And when you combine that with UNC dropping a stupid one, I do think it maybe does hurt the ACC at the top, and it certainly makes things more wide open. But maybe that means somebody else rises and ends up being the top team. We just don't really know.
So want to shout out Chardon88 for the super chat. Thank you. And I think Clemson, Georgia is entertaining, but I also think that we're more entertaining, at least right now. Somebody's talked a little bit about Iowa State, and this is another kind of victory lap for us. Iowa State tends to suck in these openers for some reason. They've struggled with Northern Iowa before. They've obviously they had the loss last year, but we've talked before about how I think today about how we can't trust that offense, and we said we left them out of our top 10 for a reason, and this is the reason. I mean, look. 16-10 is not great. We don't just care about wins and losses. They're going to get to scrape by and not get really dunked in the rankings because everybody else is kind of struggling around them. But it doesn't excite me for their potential to give Oklahoma a lot of, a run for their money unless Oklahoma's not that good. But on the flip side, and this is the matchup we got next week, Iowa State, Iowa, which is going to be rocking. Iowa looked great today, and I want you to weigh in because you've not been super high on Indiana. How much do you think Iowa's really good and Indiana's not really good?
Hard to say. There were a lot of people that were very high on Iowa coming into the year, and I didn't necessarily buy it. That's one that I need to rewatch in more detail. We're human. I can only watch so many games at one time, and I do split screen, and I can still only watch 3 or 4 at one time. But my feeling on Indiana, they had a great game against Ohio State where Penix hit some low probability throws, and Ohio State's defense was really shaky. He gets injured, and we all kind of assume that his injury was the reason that they weren't a fantastic team at the end of the year. But there's a lot of other stuff at play, like the fact that, they won this close game last year against Penn State, right? And everybody was really high on them as a result of that as well. Well, Penn State, as it turns out, last year really wasn't a great team. And they looked like the worst team in that game. And something I talk about a lot is, look, I give you credit for wins and losses. Like if you win the game, you win the game. That's what matters for playoff rankings, et cetera, et cetera. But something people struggle with is beating team A doesn't make you good enough to beat team B. Like the fact that you beat Penn State last year is not going to beat Iowa this year. That's not, has no relation to anything. And I think from that perspective, maybe the warning signs were kind of there, that Indiana had struggles at times last year, and that maybe we did really overhype them in a really short season. And again, they lost to Ole Miss, right, in the bowl game. I mean, they had losses. We just kind of made this grand assumption that they were good defensively, they would get their quarterback back, and suddenly everything would be fixed and all would be wonderful. And that probably was very much an overassumption for what was going to happen. So I'm reserving judgment on Indiana and Iowa. It may be that Iowa's really good, but I'm reserving judgment.
So not surprised by the UNC implosion. I'm surprised that it happened in week 1. I'm not surprised that they're not a top 10 team. And we've seen, like, if you would have told somebody, hey, you're going to give up 17 points for Virginia Tech, they'd be like, oh, okay, we're going to kill them. I'm encouraged that they didn't give up 30 points in the game because they've had defensive struggles in the past. But, man, you've got who is really an elite quarterback in Howell. You can't have that big of a step back in just because you lose a lot of skill players. That, to me, is coaching. I am surprised that it was week 1. I figured it'd be a random loss in the middle of the season. It does kind of sour my hopes of the ACC. I just said I think the ACC is going to be better this year, but I don't know who you look to for that. Obviously, Miami's not beating Clemson, in my opinion, if they play them in the ACC championship game. But even with that blowout, maybe we can talk a little bit about it. Even with that blowout, I liked some of what I saw from Miami today. I thought they held the running game in check. I thought, if you give Derek King a little more time, it looks like his leg's okay, his arm's great. The touchdown he threw was awesome. Am I wrong to think that Miami looked better than maybe the score or maybe like if they'd have played anybody besides Bama today, they'd have been okay.
Yeah, I'll back off and answer one thing because I'm going to completely forget it if I don't. I commented a lot in the North Carolina game that I just thought their approach to that game was kind of baffling. And I don't know if they're going to be able to rebalance it because it's not really Howell. It's what they were trying to do. They were in a hurry up, and I was complaining that they're running zone read RPO in the hurry up. And that's where you're reading the linebacker and you either give or you throw based off the read. And if you're in hurry up and the clock was running out in the game, you don't want to run the ball. So for a bit, Virginia Tech was letting them run it, and they get 6 yards. It's like, okay, great, you're burning clock. And then they kind of kept doing it, even though they were then forcing the throw because they knew they couldn't run. Well, that's the problem. If you have a scheme like that and you're totally reliant on it, they didn't have the ability to run a regular passing offense at any high level. And Virginia Tech basically just kind of did things they were able to play the run well enough that they could sort of take away the pass from that one scheme, and they had no plan B. But yeah, with Miami, I think that Miami showed that they were a pretty good secondary. I mean, Alabama did not really get a ton from their receivers in terms of like screen plays going for big yardage or anything like that. I mean, they had a couple kind of quasi busts in the back end, but
And that
that
was with
was
Bolden out.
yeah, and yeah, Bubba Bolden was out, so that was a factor in that. But I felt like they were staying with the Alabama receivers pretty well. Alabama didn't get anything cheap and easy underneath in the run game or the pass game. They really didn't. They had to work to get their yardage, and Alabama has one of the best offensive lines in the country that gave Young a lot of time. I was maybe a little surprised at how well their front seven played, given how poorly they played at times last year. And then offensively, I mean, it's hard to judge. Alabama's defense is probably going to be the best defense in the country this year, but probably will turn out to be or prove to be. And like you're watching this Georgia Clemson game that's 10-3. And I'm telling you right now, Alabama's defense is probably better than either of the defenses in that game. So if that's true, it's kind of hard to fight Miami for struggling to score a ton. I mean, they're just not going to have that sort of situation put in front of them. And they did, for the most part, were able to hold their blocks. I thought Derek King was really poised in that game, and they still made some plays down the field. So, yeah, I'm not super alarmed. I'm not. I think Miami still has a decent shot at having a pretty good season. Looks like might have lost Daniel for a minute. I'm trying to reload a feed. If Clifford plays like he did in the first half against Wisconsin, then they play Auburn, then that game might be tight. The Wisconsin Penn State game, I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, that felt like it was setting the sport of football back a couple decades. It was painful to watch at times. It was lots of sort of simplistic schemes, lots of, I mean, it was traditional big boy football with a fullback and running it up the middle, but there wasn't a lot of creativity to it. Neither one of the quarterbacks showed a lot of dynamicism, which made me think that they could, roll out and beat a high level team either. I mean, yeah, they were great defensively, but in the RPO era, we say this a lot. If you're a really good team, you can manufacture production. It's impossible to completely stop an RPO offense because the sport's a little bit unfair and broken. And I think they're going to be really good and they could stay in a lot of games. But with the level of sophistication and quarterback play that those two teams presented, they're going to struggle to beat a lot of teams. And even some bad teams will beat you because, yeah, I mean, you can stonewall them for the most part, but they're going to pop 2 RPO plays and get 14 points. And if your offense is that anemic, you can lose 14-13 to almost anybody.
So I don't know if did you touch on the question that's up now about Sean Clifford and Auburn?
I didn't touch on Auburn specifically, but I was touching on Clifford and Penn State a little bit.
Yeah, so Auburn looked good today against Akron, but the Zips aren't a great football team, so it's really hard to judge much. Although I had an Auburn fan friend reach out to me today, and he's like, gone is the meerkat and the cards on the sideline and the gimmicky stuff. So that was refreshing.
I'll stop you and say they're not just not a very good team. They won 2 games last year. They went like 2-5, 2-7, and almost all their losses were by 30+ points to mid-tier G5s like a Western Michigan. They're really bad.
So, like
Akron
I
is
said, they're
really, really
decent.
bad.
They're pretty good. They're decent. But no, so I think that like, and that's why you don't say, oh, we're going to win this game or whatever against Penn State in 2 weeks. They got Alabama State next week. 2 tune-ups, which is probably ideal. But you also like we've seen Auburn when they were bad, and we see these warning signs early on where they struggle against some random G5, and it's like, oh, that's a harbinger of doom, right? So that's encouraging. But in general, to me, I think that Auburn at Penn State, one, that's a crazy atmosphere to have your first real game with your new coach or whatever. And two, I think that's going to look a lot like Wisconsin and Penn State because neither of those offenses are probably going to do too much, and both have pretty good defenses. What do you think?
Yeah.
Let's just go do our preview right now.
I think so. Like somebody's making the comment that let Penn State tune up their offense. Sheesh. You're like I get the comment, but you're not gonna overhaul your offense in a week, and that's the problem for a lot of these teams that are showing hiccups. Yeah, some stuff might get ironed out a little bit, but like Michigan a few years ago when they first hired Gaddis, it took them a season to iron out the offense. If you've got major issues. Last year was weird again because you didn't have spring and fall camp. So there were teams that got there and realized stuff wasn't working, and it took them a while to figure out why and get some things fixed. But in a normal year, when you've had spring practice and summer practice and fall camp, if you don't have things kind of sort of working at this point, I mean, if you're really, really janky, I don't think you're going to fix it in a week or two. I don't know that you're going to fix it in 6 weeks. Ooh, interception by UCLA there.
UCLA's defense tonight has looked legit. And that's what my takeaway more than in the Hawaii game, more than Zach Charbonnet running for 50 yards an attempt or whatever, was their defense looked like, and what you said, which was kind of a backhanded compliment. You said they looked like a real football team. But their defense looked really legit. They looked sound and fundamental, reminded me a lot of like Notre Dame defenses, not crazy athletic, but really fundamentally sound. And that's what, when everybody talks about what Max Johnson saw last year and he put up numbers against Ole Miss and won both his starts, he didn't see a defense. He didn't see a fundamentally sound defense. He didn't see any of that. So that's what our concern in this game was going to be is he's finally seeing a defense. So somebody said they're super interested to see some of the week 2 lines. This might be fun. Let's kind of, guess. Let's do Ohio State and Oregon. I think it's going to be Ohio State -8. What do you think that line's going to look like based on what you saw today?
Oh, gosh. I mean, it's hard to say. I think as rough as Ohio State looked against Minnesota, I think the line is going to slide potentially towards Ohio State. I mean, I think Ohio State.
Thibodeau might be out though, so that I think changes a little bit too.
Yeah, I could easily see Ohio State being favored by a couple touchdowns in that game. I mean, do you agree with me on that?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I said -8. I just it's so hard to know when we don't know if he's coming back. And two, I don't know if like the guys that were out for Ohio State against Minnesota, I don't know if they're back or not. But man, I don't know how you beat Ohio State without a quarterback right now. So it looks like Clemson's drive came up short. There were like 4.5 minutes left in the game. If this game finishes 10-3, the hidden story in this is going to be the 3 offensive points from Georgia, right? Like for all the talk of how great JT Daniels is and has been, we've now seen him 2 games in a row against good or elite defenses, and he's been limited, or they've been able to bottle him up. So do you think what we've seen tonight from JT Daniels and Georgia offense is more of them feeling so good about their defense that they've not taken any risks, or that there are some concerns there offensively?
No, there's concerns offensively. The look, it's easy to say Uiagalelei has looked really rough in this game, but one of those quarterbacks in this game is 4.5 yards per attempt, 135 yards passing, and one of the quarterbacks is 4.8 yards per attempt and 178 yards passing. Which quarterback has fewer yards in this game? It's JT Daniels.
Yeah.
Daniels has thrown for less. He's thrown for less per play, and he's also thrown a pick. The difference in this game is that Georgia had a pick six and was a good breaking route. It may be a risky decision. I didn't think it was a horrible decision. It was really just a really good play by the Georgia defender. Daniels is struggling just as much in this game as Uiagalelei is. Statistically, they are. And the difference in this game, again, it's the pick six, and it's also the fact that Georgia can actually run the ball, which is making their offense move some, and Clemson can't run at all. So their offense, if they don't hit a pass, it's fatal. Whereas Georgia's missing, they're not really moving the ball themselves at all through the air, but a couple yards here and there seems to matter, seems effective when you're 3rd and 4 and you get a 5-yard pass, then you get a first down and it feels like a success. Clemson is on 3rd and 11 and they get a 5-yard pass and it feels like they can't accomplish anything. That's the difference. So
UCLA.
To your point though, and this is where it feels like maybe we're being overly critical to people, which to a large degree we are. These are two great teams, but both these teams want to be in the playoff hunt, in the championship hunt. And I don't know how well their defense will or will not stop some other teams, but I know they're going to play some other defenses that are this good. You're going to have to play an Ohio State or that's actually going to be healthy, or an Alabama that have good lines and have good secondaries. And, Georgia probably can't win against Alabama with a pick six and 3 offensive points. So it's a concern.
Yeah. And that's what, like, for all of the nitpicking I want to do for Alabama today, like, there's a little bit of concern defensively in the secondary. There was Allen's probably going to be out for the year, so that's a depth hit on the defense. The run game wasn't there. I still think that Alabama's going to put up at least 24 on a Georgia, and Alabama's defense is better than Clemson's. Even with Allen out, it's better, especially in the secondary. Okay, so somebody said they're not sold on Coombs. Kerry Coombs, to me, I don't love some of the matchups. Like, he got killed for the matchups in the national championship game, especially linebacker on Devonta Smith, but that was also, he was personnel limited, I think, a lot in that game. So I think that Kerry Coombs has gotten a lot of heat. I'm a little concerned, I'll be honest, in terms of development and the defense that Ohio State has put on the field the last 5 years relative to the talent that they're getting in terms of recruiting. Because if you look at it, like, they're not that far behind. They're barely behind Georgia and Alabama in terms of recruiting. They're ahead of Clemson. Those 3 other defenses are a good bit better than Ohio State's defense. So do you think that's Coombs, or do you think it's just something else?
At some point, the defensive coordinator has got to own that a little bit, right? Look, Ohio State did have their starting corners out of the game. And the corners are a big part of the defense. They stress their corners a lot with that single high safety look. But the other reality is it's not like they struggled against Minnesota because Minnesota was throwing the ball overly successfully, right? I mean, Minnesota was not moving the ball through the air. They hit a couple shots early. Mainly they got some pass interferences that bailed out drives. Minnesota stayed in that game by running the ball. And Ohio State didn't have third-string guys in on the D-line in that game. They didn't have third-string guys on that linebacker. I know they had some guys banged up, but they weren't playing third-stringers. Ohio State has issues. And the problem for me is Ohio State's linebackers have been super inconsistent for like 5 years now. And I kind of wonder what in the world's going on. And that's been a national problem with how I don't know why linebacker play's fallen off. I think the RPO makes it, linebackers and safeties, it makes their job really hard. It's hard to read offenses now. And they don't get keys anymore, run pass and things like that. But when Minnesota's just lining up and running standard power run plays and you don't know how to do gap fits, and they were like a blocking sled at times on the defensive line. That's a concern. Now, I'm going to take all that and combine it with when you want to blame Coombs. I usually blame Coombs because he puts his corners on an island, right? I mean, isn't that our stick? They run almost a bear defense where
single high safety in the RPO era doesn't work. That's been our whole complaint.
But was that actually the problem in the Minnesota game?
I mean, they did run a good bit of single high safety, but no. I actually think that until he got hurt, the run game was the problem.
Right. So if the run game's the problem, and our issue is that he plays more against the run, I mean, maybe you can ding him or the coaching staff are not doing a great job of teaching the players, but I don't think it's a schematic issue, at least with the Minnesota game. I still am really skeptical of how they're going to do with a team that can throw, but that's not in any way related to Minnesota. Minnesota really raises concerns about evaluation and about coaching and development. And that's a whole different animal.
Okay, you got a note, and I want to let you get to it. Florida stat line, go for it.
Yeah, so something I want to note real quick. We talked at length in the preseason about the fact that Oklahoma, we thought was going to be a really good team. I mean, Daniel, we had them 1 and 2. Daniel had them number 1. I had them number 2. But we were super concerned that people were really overreacting to the Florida win, given the fact that we really didn't think Florida's backups were very good. I don't know how many of you guys have actually looked at the Florida stat line. Yeah, they won 35-7. Emory Jones was 17 of 27 for 113 yards, 4.2 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. 4.2 yards per attempt and 2 picks. They don't have a passing game by all accounts. They beat Florida Atlantic by running the ball on FAU until they broke them, which they can do with guys like Malik Davis because FAU is FAU. That is not going to work in the SEC. And I've seen Malik Davis. He's a solid back, but he's not going to get 7.4 yards per carry against Georgia or even someone like Kentucky. They've got problems. And I'm going to raise the red flag right now that you need to be really concerned if you're a Florida fan, frankly. Florida Atlantic threw for 7.8 yards per attempt. They ran for 5.8 yards per attempt by their backs. The main thing that killed them was negative plays from N'Kosi Perry. Potentially took a lot of sacks, which I know gets to the Florida defense. But, yeah, there's reasons to be concerned for sure about Florida's viability and the guys that stepped up as starters. Florida has not recruited well for the past several years. Mullen is not a great recruiter, and McElwain really wasn't. They may take a much larger step back than people anticipated. And I think the Oklahoma game may have been more a clue to that than it was Oklahoma's dominance.
So just real quick, somebody said Penn State has the best secondary in the Big Ten. I'd say Iowa does. Someone touched on, that said touchdown in LSU. Someone touched on the fact that Washington is currently losing to, I think, Montana. We already talked about Oregon struggling with Fresno today. Does this kind of put a little bit of a damper on the games next week? I think Washington plays Michigan next week. If not, it's week 3. And then it was a ref-assisted touchdown. And then you've got, obviously, Oregon playing State. Like, can you, if we've got the 1 touchdown win against Fresno, let's say Washington comes back, wins an ugly game against Montana. Can you still get excited about these games in week 2 or week 3, knowing that there is information in those wins that give you a little bit of a bad feeling?
I think you should. I mean, you should get excited to watch college football generally, or at least that's my attitude. Look, we're being pretty negative because there's a lot of things to pick at with these teams, but let me take a step back and ask you a question, Daniel. Coming out of this weekend, can you name 5 teams that looked dominant against high-level competition?
I got 2 high-level competition. I think Iowa and Alabama are the only 2 teams that were even dominant today.
Right. I mean, against, like, let's say top 30, top 40 level team. Alabama, Iowa,
That's
kind of
it.
drawing a blank.
Yeah.
Like, there's probably another one I'm not thinking of. Everybody else was in some sort of a fight that I saw.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, A&M's in a fight. Florida's in a fight. I mean, not a fight, but like not dominant, right? Texas looked pretty good. I'll say Texas, but we're not
yeah,
putting
that's
Texas in
fair.
the top 10, right? Because we know that roster is not really what it needs to be, and it's going to take a year for starting to get it going. So, and we're not putting Iowa in the top 10 either. So, yeah, like I don't know, like here's the thing: the teams that were dominant today are the teams that I'm least confident about that being real information, like Michigan. I've been burned on Michigan so many times. I don't know, like I can't trust it.
Yeah, I mean, you look down the score sheet, like Cincinnati blew out Miami, Ohio. Does that mean anything? I have no idea. Uh,
Well, now the problem we have a lot of times with these G5s that are highly ranked is that they don't handle business. So in that regard, I give them credit.
yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. I'm just saying, I don't know how great that makes them be, but
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'm saying because it's Miami, Ohio. So the ones that dominated a lot of times did it against teams that were really low level, where I can't really say a lot. The teams that were playing meaningful, like truly meaningful opponents, um, they really didn't. So, does like I'm saying with LSU, who's still right now down 4 to UCLA. Let's say LSU loses this game, or let's say LSU comes back and beats UCLA. Does this mean that either team's bad, or maybe they're both really good? I have said from the jump that I really thought the biggest problem was people did not anticipate how good UCLA was probably going to be. And
Right,
if that's true, then maybe we're all being way too negative on LSU because
right.
LSU may lose that game. Like I don't know. I saw this a lot from LSU fans. They were stumping it like, "Oh, there's no way UCLA can stay with us. We're going to win this game 40-10." Like that was our whole comment section. It was kind of insane.
Yeah, the entire.
Um, and it really, frankly, it was about disrespecting who UCLA was, and the overreaction about how this being bad football or what can we look forward to or negatives or blah blah blah. Some of these teams are going to make the playoffs. It can't just be Alabama. And so these games that you think are flawed teams next week, they're going to really matter. And we're going to find out some of these close games from teams that we thought were not as good. Maybe like Mississippi State coming back on La Tech, right? It's easy to talk about how Mississippi State, and they turned it over like crazy, didn't look good in that game. Maybe La Tech is what Cincinnati was, not Cincinnati, Louisiana was last year. Like maybe La Tech is a G5 that is like a ranked caliber G5 team. We don't know that right now. And so you got to be a little careful, I think, in tossing teams aside or matchups aside. And to me, that's kind of the beauty of college football. This is more like 2007. It's what people want. It's craziness. But you know what? When you have craziness because everybody has flaws and they don't look unstoppable. I mean, that's what that is that everybody says they want.
So 2007 still gave us like LSU and Ohio State. So, um, and I think that's the problem with the playoff is you can only get so much craziness because you still have a playoff of 4 teams. And Alabama looked dominant today. So, you know, JJ says Georgia won't beat Bama playing like that. No, if Alabama and Georgia played today, Alabama would have won by probably 17 points. But they won't play today. They'll play maybe twice at the end of the season. So let me ask you this in terms of what we've seen and what we know about how teams get better throughout the course of the year. Who maybe doesn't look great right now that you think possibly could because of the way that the situation that's in place for them to improve over the course of the year versus like right now in LSU that is who they are and probably who they are going to be at the end of the year?
I'll tell you the obvious one, and that's Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I mean, the Tulane game was a close game, but Tulane had a good offense. Oklahoma, more than anything, they did something they've done a lot with Riley, which is they let off the gas in the second half, and they didn't just put Tulane away. That game was 37-14 at the half. And I think they let off and didn't try to squash Tulane, and Tulane was good enough that when you let off, it let them pull close.
Has that become their DNA though? Because that's what happened with Kansas State 2 years in a row. That's what happened with Iowa State. Has that become something that concerns you about Oklahoma? That
Totally.
let these teams kind of hang around? Because for me, and I'm glad you brought up Oklahoma, I'm not as concerned about the defense as I am the offense's inability to put up 60 points. That's what they need to do in a game where they're playing a good offense.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think it is their DNA. I think this is something they do way too often. I think it's something that causes them to lose stupid games. But I'm just saying, if you're asking about a team that could beat an Alabama at the end of the year, that problem doesn't mean you can't beat Alabama in a playoff. Does that make sense? Like that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah. I mean, is the other one to you Ohio State? I mean, right now, I think it's Oklahoma and Ohio State. From what I've seen from Georgia, I don't know that they're going to improve that much by the end of the year. They're going to have an elite defense at the end of the year. JT Daniels is who he is at this point. I think it's Ohio State and Oklahoma at this point, from what I've seen. And obviously, this is a week one overreaction, but for what I've seen, I think those are the two.
Yeah, well, I'll give Georgia a bone. Like, one thing we talked about a lot is they had a bunch of guys banged up coming into this game in the receiver position. They're going to get Washington back, and that's going to really help them. Not just is he's not just a good player, he's a dynamic schematic piece. Like, they want to be able to flex the tight end in and out so they can go power run and go 4 wide. And they can't really do that with the personnel they've got right now. They might get Pickens back. I don't buy that Pickens, if he comes back, is going to be a major factor. I don't see somebody coming off an ACL tear same year. I know they say he could play. I don't buy that he can be a high level player like that. And he already had issues where he was just barely really fast enough to be effective. But I don't think you can discount the fact that Georgia's defense is playing at a super high level. They've got 5-star talent all over the place. And their backups last year, maybe they didn't play well just because they didn't have practice like everybody else. And the starters they had were really experienced. And maybe now with practice, they're backups that are all 5 stars. I mean, Nolan Smith on the edge was the number 1 player in the country. And was an older player behind another elite guy, in Ojulari. Like, those guys may be really good. And you combine that with a good offensive line and some high-level skill talent at receiver that could get developed, they may be a much better offense at the end of the year and be more balanced. And if they can be a primarily run-based team with a quarterback that can play well, I think they can be certainly in that conversation with Ohio State. Let me put it this way. Is Georgia further behind offensively on Ohio State than they are ahead defensively on Ohio State?
I don't know. I think the incomplete on the wide receivers is a good point, which gives me a little pause, though. I still don't have 100% faith in JT Daniels as an elite plus quarterback, which is what you're going to need to beat Alabama, because Alabama's going to get some points. Alabama's offense is far ahead of Clemson right now, but I think Ohio State's defense is considerably far behind Georgia's right now.
So, for those that are not aware, Montana just beat Washington.
So there goes that preview for us. Thanks a lot, Washington.
Yep. Montana just beat Washington. So number 20 Washington ain't going to be number 20 next week. That's a beyond embarrassing loss. I don't know what's up with the Pac-12 of losing those games.
And this is our problem with the whole, like, we need auto bids for every P5 conference. Like, okay, so what happens when Washington actually wins a few games in conference and plays for the conference championship? We're going to say that, like, your path to the playoffs is a team who lost to Montana. Like, and so USC struggled with San Jose State for a minute and pulled away late. Maybe UCLA and USC are okay, but man, that's a tough loss for the conference. That's not like Arkansas, was it last year, a couple years ago, lost to North Texas, because that was a bad team. Washington was supposed to be one of the better teams in the Pac-12.
Washington, was supposed to be one of the better teams in the Pac-12, number 20, playing an FCS team that had their entire season canceled last year and didn't even play. It's catastrophic. This is why I don't like having auto bids, because if you have got like an 18 playoff, if you're a conference champion and you're any good, you'll be in the top 8. You always will be in the top 8. I just want the flexibility that if a team loses to Montana and maybe wins their conference, loses 2 games and wins the conference, and they're a 3-loss team with a loss to Montana, I don't want them in the playoff. That's one of the more catastrophic losses in recent memory. I think this game was on, like, what network was it?
Pac-12 network. It was on the Pac-12.
I was about to say,
like, nobody saw it.
Oregon game was the same way. People are gonna.
It was. I didn't see it because it was. I had to watch the highlights. Yeah,
we couldn't watch it live. I don't have the Pac-12 network. It's not even available. So, I mean, what do you want me to do? This is the problem the Pac-12's got to solve. Though right now it's helping them because nobody's seeing their teams look like garbage, apparently.
So this is a good philosophy question. Does Georgia go to number 1? I would say no. And there's a lot of AP voters who will put Georgia number 1 because they think the best win means that's where you go. Like, it's a resume thing. But I think that you can glean as much from Alabama straight up murdering what I think is probably a top 15 team versus Georgia struggling and barely beating a top 5 team. I don't necessarily know, like, to put Georgia ahead of Alabama right now, you would have to say, 1, Georgia would have done better against Miami, and 2, Alabama would have done worse against Clemson. And I don't think you could say yes to either of those. Just philosophically, what do you think?
I agree with that. I mean, Alabama played a high-level team and dominated them start to finish. Could have made that game much worse than it was. I mean, they called the dogs off midway through the third quarter. They beat them far worse than most teams beat G5s. A much better question, Daniel, is do you move Georgia to number 2 or number 3?
I mean, right now, I've got them at 2 based on, like, Ohio State defensively concerned me. Oklahoma, both sides of the ball concerned me a little bit. Rattler had 2 interceptions today. They were not great interceptions in terms of, like, his play. So I'm dropping Oklahoma to 4. That's as far as I'm going to drop them, and I'll probably have Georgia number 2.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, I think Ohio State, we took a lot of heat. And we've talked about Ohio State off and on. We took a lot of heat for having Ohio State like 5th, 6th in our rankings for all the recruiting. And I talked about how I was concerned because I didn't think they had like explosive dudes. And you've seen that, I think. People saw that in the Minnesota game. All the concerns I had, all the turnover they have, and there's a lack of enough guys to make, especially defensively, disruptive guys to make enough of an impact. But when you look at Georgia in that game and all their flaws and however much they struggled, it's hard to say why Oklahoma would be ahead or why Ohio State would be ahead or Clemson, who just lost the game to Georgia, certainly can't be ahead of Georgia. So if you've got to put, in my mind, you have to put Georgia ahead of Clemson. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
So that puts them, I think they're number 2 in my rankings. I'll give that away. I think the interesting question then that comes out is, where do you put Clemson? How much do you want to dock Clemson for losing to Georgia compared to Oklahoma and Ohio State and those other teams at the top?
I think you put them right behind them. I don't drop them too far because the question is, who else in the top 10? And this is what's going to frustrate me is the AP voters that really dump Clemson. Because who else in the top 10 was going to beat Georgia tonight? Ohio State, maybe. Alabama, probably. And that's the list, right? So that's what's frustrating is, like, we're going to see that Clemson's 0-1, right? And we're going to dump them because there's a lot of 1-0 teams, and that's just not the right way to do it, in my opinion. What do you think?
I do. And there's people in here like saying Clemson is average. Are we not concerned?
Get out of here with that. No.
Stop. You guys do not if you take that angle that Clemson's average, you do not understand how good Georgia is defensively. Ohio State is a really talented defense. Georgia is substantially more talented in terms of recruiting rankings, substantially more talented than Ohio State right now. And that's as much as I respect Ohio State. Ohio State has a lot more talent on offense. But Georgia is more talented defensively. That is an extremely good defense. And they and Alabama are going to be fighting over who's the best unit. The problem is Alabama's offense is way ahead of Georgia's. But that also tempers the way you look at Clemson. And the same thing with Georgia offensively. They struggled a lot. But Clemson's defense is really, really good. And a lot of people think them to be easily a top 5 defense. So that might be the second and third best defense in the country may have just played each other in.
Yeah.
That might be
there's some bad takes right now. Like Clemson's lost 2 straight. Okay, they lost to Ohio State and like Georgia on the road with a sophomore quarterback. I mean, come on. Somebody said Clemson should be 9. There are not 8 teams in the country that would have beat Clemson tonight. I'm sorry. There are not. And what people don't realize is when you have an elite unit, so Georgia's got an elite defense, if you just tweak that just a little bit, and I want you to talk about this, if you tweak that just a little bit to where they're not elite anymore, they're just really good, that difference is enough to maybe give Clemson 20 or 25 points offensively.
Yeah, elite versus very good is a big gap. There weren't really any elite defenses. Maybe Alabama's was touching that at the very end of the year. Georgia's was, but when they were healthy, I think. When they were fully healthy, they were at that mark or close to it. But yeah, now we talk a lot with RPO. In the RPO era, you should be able to put up 30 or 40 points even on an elite defense. We have said that, so we've got to stand by it. But yeah, no, I think people are overreacting. Let me put it this way: we have no reason to believe that game wasn't 2011 Alabama LSU played in week 1. The reason we didn't freak out about that 2011 Alabama LSU game is hadn't both teams beaten everyone they played by 20 plus points going into it. I believe that's right, including LSU destroyed Oregon that won the Pac that year in their opener. And so when we saw the game 6-3, we knew that was just how good the defenses were. I'm not saying for sure that's the case, but take a step back before you think that Clemson's like the 9th best team in the country because they struggled against Georgia. That's way too harsh of a reaction.
Somebody said we were so wrong about the scores, LOL. So if you had Georgia 13, Clemson 3, please, you need to go bet the house on every game because you know everything. Nobody had that score. Are you kidding me? And I was really close on Minnesota, Ohio State. I had them, I think it was I think I had Ohio State winning by 17. They won by 14. I had 30s and 20s, something like that. LSU and UCLA is not over yet. We stuck our necks out on that. It's going to go into the fourth quarter with UCLA ahead. LSU might pull it out, but come on. If you're going to get on us about picks and scores, this week we had a push on Ohio State, Minnesota. We missed Clemson and Georgia, but it's a crapshoot. Killing people for their picks in August. I mean, that's a little wild because
you say scores, but realize I picked Georgia to cover. I picked Georgia against the spread too. I mean, I didn't pick them to win, but I still picked them against the spread. It's picking against it. You can pick the score against the spread straight up. Straight up's easy if we were to pick every game in college football because favorites win.
We'd win 80% of the time. Yeah.
Favorites win 75% of the time in college football. And in terms of what happens when you pick a game that's actually a significant favorite, once you get up to 2 score favorite, 14-point line, now it's an 85% chance. It's easy to do that. But when you're talking against the spread or trying to pick score is impossible almost. I mean, you can try to do over under, but it's do teams decide to hurry up the game and go tempo? Because if you do that, like you can end up with that's what happened a bit in like Minnesota, Ohio State, right? Like the tempo of that game controlled the score more than anything. And like I don't get credit for the fact that I actually picked Georgia. I think I had Clemson by 2, which meant I had Georgia with the points. And so, you want to pick the score, but you don't give me credit for that. It's really difficult to pick games.
You
And if
you didn't have Clemson scoring 3 points in this game, you idiot.
Yeah, I mean if you could go 60% against the spread, you're doing really, really well.
Right.
Vegas is pretty good at lines, and 60% is. Again, when I first started, and before I started doing a blog, which is how I got into doing this podcast, I won an SB Nation pick'em. There were over 300 people that actually picked all games, 20 games a week, start to finish, and I won it. And I won it at 58%, I want to say, against the spread. That won the entire pool. That's if you actually picked, a few hundred games in a year. That it's extremely difficult to hit over 55%. It's just tough.
So does Clemson still have a shot at the playoff? I think so. The thing that people always do that's wrong, that we kind of harp on, is people look at a specific team in isolation and they fail to look at everybody else around them. And so if Clemson wins out, based on what you saw from everybody else today, are you guaranteeing me that Oklahoma's going to be in over them? Or do we know for sure that Notre Dame's going to be good enough to go undefeated again? Like, it sucks for Clemson that this is the only ranked team they're going to play this year. Like, it's not their fault, right? Now, if they go out and really struggle in a win against NC State, who might be decent, or really struggle in the ACC championship game against Miami, that's information, right? But if they murder the rest of their schedule, I'm not leaving them out of the playoffs. If everybody else is kind of struggle bus as well.
Yeah, and that's where I was making that 2011 comparison, right? I mean, we don't know what Clemson's going to look like if they could play some teams ranked 15th through 25th. I don't think we're going to get many opportunities to see that. And that gives their ability to make a good impression hard. They can't lose a game this year, especially with UNC and Miami losing UNC loses to Virginia Tech, hurts the conference, assuming Virginia Tech doesn't end up being great, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think that was more UNC laying an egg, and they'll probably do that one more time if I had to guess. And Miami, I think, will be a good team, but clearly wasn't on Alabama's level. So now, just as a whole, the conference is struggling to establish itself. It makes it hard for Clemson to claw back up. Can I bring up let me interject a question here before we enter one. What do you think it's important for the ACC to beat Notre Dame on Monday? How much of a role with their matchup? Like, how much of a role can Notre Dame play in helping the ACC establish some credibility?
Well, it's an interesting point because it tangentially has a lot to do with Clemson, right? And that's what you're getting at with the question. If Florida beats Notre Dame, because Notre Dame is really like the 6th Power 5 conference unto themselves as it relates to playoff slots. So there's 4 playoff slots, and there's always some Power 5 conference champion who sucks, and it's usually Pac-12. But then there's Notre Dame, who's kind of vampiring this 4th slot because they'll go undefeated against their schedule. So not only beat them, but if Florida State plays well in that game and it's a close game, I think that really bolsters the ACC's ability to keep Notre Dame out if Clemson does win out.
Yes, if I followed that. Like, somebody was asking if Clemson plays Notre Dame. They don't, but it's a deal where teams play teams that play Notre Dame. So Notre Dame can kind of inject wins into the ACC. I talk about the bag of wins concept a lot in college football, where if you think about it, there's a fixed number of wins, right? Every conference has, if you got 14 teams, you play 8 games each. I'm doing math live on camera. This is a terrible idea. Was it 80 plus 32, 112 wins in the conference, right? It's a fixed number. And so you got 112 wins and 112 losses. But when you play Notre Dame's outside your conference, right? So they can add to your win total or they can add to your loss total, if you think about it that way. And so if you can beat Notre Dame, you can kind of add to the average number of wins of your team. And that just sort of helps everybody because now you beat an 8-win team instead of a 7-win team at the end of the year too, when you're talking about rankings. So that's where it's beneficial to play and beat Notre Dame.
So this hypothetical came up. What if Georgia's only loss is to Bama and it's close? Does Clemson get in? That really matters about the other two. Because I think if Georgia and Alabama are undefeated going into the SEC championship game, there's a high chance that the loser of that game is still not even the fourth slotted team in the playoffs. It really depends on what the Pac-12 does, what everybody like. It's not just like we were talking about before. It's not in a vacuum. But right now, what this win does is it gives Georgia a pretty decent trump card should Clemson win out and gives them a little breathing room to potentially lose the SEC championship game and still be in the playoffs. Question for you, Josh. We got a super chat and I want to thank Yash for that. So the question is Georgia's D better than Bama's from the first game? And somebody said yes down the line. I want you to touch on this because I don't know that we can gauge that based on the offenses they face. But what do you think?
I think Georgia's defense is from the first game last year. So I guess the question is Georgia's defense now better than Alabama's was at that time last year?
No, I think they're saying it.
After the first game,
we've seen both of them play today. Who's got the better defense?
Well, Alabama lost Allen. The post-game injury report, I looked it up. Was curious. I think didn't Saban say that Allen might be out for the year?
Yeah, it's. He said it was a serious foot injury, and he might be out for the year.
I almost would say the defenses are a push from what I just saw.
Interior defensive line, I think, is obviously better for Georgia. Secondary might be better for Alabama. Linebackers probably better for maybe
Alabama. I'd agree. Alabama's secondary, that's probably fair. Alabama's secondary is better than Georgia's, I think. And it's not a knock on Georgia. Alabama's just really, really sound in the secondary. The Branch kid and Moore, they're like
they didn't even have like they were missing a starter today.
Yeah, they had a starter out with injury in that game. They were out actually a couple of starters. The starter at right tackle was also out for Alabama. I think secondary is better, but linebackers are a push. Alabama's starters, I don't know who's better at the starter to starter. I think Georgia's backups might be a little better. They're really experienced and really good. They can run a bunch of guys on the field. And their interior line's better on Georgia. It's a push. I might give the edge to Georgia, a gun to my head. I might right now from what I've seen, but it's hard to compare. That's an interesting question though, right? Like I'm saying that, but at the same time, Miami moved the ball a lot better than Clemson did, didn't they? So doesn't that mean that Georgia's better?
Because they moved the ball, but go ahead.
Say, does that, or am I implying the fact that Miami's offense is better than Clemson's offense? Like, how do I parse that logically to myself?
So I will say that I think Harris is a better running back than anything that Clemson has right now. The problem with Clemson's offense is the offensive line. But I think King is a better quarterback than he gets credit for. When Rambo is the best wide receiver on your team, which I think he is, that's tough. I don't know right now what I think you get from Miami's offense. And here's the problem is Miami can score 20 to 24 points on a good defense, not elite defense, but on a good defense because they're going to get enough shot plays. They're going to get enough where King really just grooves the ball in there like he did on the one touchdown today. They don't have a good enough offense to stay on the field and really stress a defense over the course of a game. And I think Clemson does. But tonight, Clemson didn't move the ball in Georgia's defense. I think that's a good question of like, if we saw both and one scored more, but then how hard was Alabama trying after the second quarter?
Well, some people are pointing out stats, and I will say that's not really a fair comparison because Miami played half the game in garbage time. Alabama's starting defense maybe played half the game, and they were playing third and fourth string guys at the end of it. So I'd have a hard time parsing the stats. But it's a little in these big games. Sometimes you statistically end up better because your defense is trying harder. You have your starting defense going 100 miles an hour, running your full scheme. And I still think it was super impressive. This is what I would say about Clemson versus Miami, as I think with King and what they've got in terms of stylistically at Miami is more capable of getting some sort of sporadic chunk plays where they can put up some points, I think, on anyone just because King is going to create that. Uyunglele is a really good quarterback, but with the line problems and the issue and the way they're built and the fact that he's not a great runner, and he's a solid athlete, right? But I mentioned this in preview. He's not a fantastic runner. They can't really deal if the interior line is getting blown up. They just don't have a way to do it. And that's the difference. Even though if Clemson played Miami, I think Clemson's offense would end up being better in that matchup. But when, like you were saying, very good versus elite, when you start playing an elite defense, it changes the stress points. And Clemson's offense wasn't capable of compensating. UCLA scored again. I mean, we're 31-20 UCLA LSU now. UCLA's run game is, well, one of two things is true. Maybe both are true, right? UCLA's run game is legit, or LSU's run defense is not all that great. Or it could be the thing that I noted in the preview, which is LSU's run defense last year was like 9th in the conference, and UCLA's run offense is pretty darn good. And, if you get bashed on for 4 quarters, you can end up giving 31 points.
We've got 2 super chats we need to call out. Radar Channel said, and I'll take one, I'll let you take the next one. Don't forget Georgia's starters out on offense and defense. We touched on both of those earlier in the chat and said that it's a legitimate point, especially at wide receiver for Georgia. So, and look, Georgia's got the rest of the year to get that offense really dialed in. But right now, gosh, that defense looks good. And then we got another one. I'm going to put it up on the board. Edward, huge friend of the program, both on Twitter. And y'all, we tweet a lot throughout the week. So if you like what we're talking about on the show, follow us on Twitter. Edward hits us up on Twitter and in the comments. He's always one of the first to comment on every video we post. I'll let you take this one, Josh. So many rough first games. Who surprised you the most, either good or bad? And thank you again for the super chat.
Oh, gosh. Who surprised me, good or bad? I need to go back and rewatch it. The score that surprised me the most was probably Iowa. I didn't expect him to just blow up Indiana because one thing I'll say, Indiana defensively has been really good for a number of years. And Iowa's offensively been really bad and hasn't been able to run anyone out of the stadium. That caught my attention. And so right off the bat, that's what I would go with. And I'll think on maybe another team. I'll bounce it back to you. I mean, do you have an answer or?
Iowa and Texas were my pleasant surprises. Iowa State was my biggest disappointment.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I hate so many of these games are locked behind ESPN Plus and stuff. There were a number of games I couldn't actually catch from teams that were interesting. The Montana loss is stunning. The Washington-Montana loss, which I don't know from the public Twitter sphere how much that's being talked about, but that's going to have major repercussions for the Pac-12. That's brutal.
Shout out on 88. I think second super chat, either first or second. Thank you very much. So Bucks by 40 next week. I don't know about 40. And fastest white dude on a planet, maybe. But Bucks by 40 next week. I don't know, like, because I think Oregon really was for a while kind of nerfing what they do offensively, though we have talked about already in this chat tonight. We're a little concerned with them at quarterback. So talk about that. I think I got to find a super chat that we missed. So talk about that, Josh, a little bit. How maybe that might be a little bit optimistic.
Yeah, look, just because a team did poorly one week too doesn't mean they're going to do poorly the next week. But Oregon still has good pieces. And Fresno, the biggest thing to me is Fresno's a very different matchup than Ohio State's going to present. Fresno is a more pass-happy team. They've got good quarterback play and a good passing game. And Ohio State right now is a much better run team than they are a passing team. And I know they got a couple big chunk plays on Minnesota, but they got those in part because Minnesota was playing so hard for the run that they got some separation. And Minnesota, let's be clear, Minnesota defensively was really bad last year. And they may prove to be as bad this year. So that's kind of tough for me to evaluate. And again, on the other side, Oregon, I don't think their passing game is very good, so it's going to be hard for them to win a shootout. But Ohio State had so many problems with a running game that with Brown, who is a great running player, they might be able to, manufacture something. And so I could easily see that game. I don't know that I want to commit myself to a pick, but like a 30-20 score seems more reasonable right now in my mind than a 40-point win, actually.
So I found the super chat we missed. Thank you, Jill. The block 22. Who, in your opinion, had a better offensive showing, Alabama or Ohio State? I think right now, Alabama. We didn't see the nerves from Bryce Young that we saw from Stroud. Stroud looked good in the second half. I think he finally calmed down. The overthrows were there. The inaccuracy was there in a way that you picked up on from the spring game and got killed for by Ohio State fans in our preview. And I think it turned out to be right. I also like Alabama's running back room a little bit more, but offensive line wise, they're both great. They're both really great. I think Alabama's offensive line is better in pass protection than Ohio State's. I think Ohio State's offensive line might be better in the run game. Just real quick, from what you saw, what do you think?
I think that's fair. I think I don't really have much more to comment on it. I think it's fair. I think, for example, I think Ohio State. I'll go ahead and tell you, I think Ohio State's probably going to beat Oregon. It's just when you start talking about winning by 40 points, it's a different deal. Speak the truth, tell no lies. I honestly don't know what you honestly don't know what you're talking about. You guys, if you're gonna argue with me, give me an idea of what I said that was wrong about, and maybe I can comment on it. But if you just tell me I'm wrong, there's a delay, so I have no idea what the comment was even about. So I guess I was wrong about something somewhere around 30 to 90 seconds ago. I'm not even sure what it was. Probably longer based off when the comment was.
So
I don't mind you disagreeing, but just let me know what it is in the comment because I have no idea what you were disagreeing with.
Like all the LSU fans who disagreed with us this week, they told us how dumb we were in comment after comment after comment. And they did the same thing last summer where you and I both said it, but you were really out in front on Twitter about it in regards to their losing so much talent to the draft, turning over that coaching staff. The alarm bells were ringing. And then they had opt-outs, and we're like, y'all, this is going to be a problem. And we were called every name in the book up until week one started. And then they lost to Mississippi State, and all these people ghosted us, and they were gone. They came back for our prediction this year when we said UCLA was going to win in this game. And we admitted, we got no crystal ball. We're not saying they're definitely going to win. LSU's terrible. We actually talked up UCLA, got trashed all week by LSU fans. And and now they're going to ghost us for the rest of the year. And I feel like this is kind of what we're getting here a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm saying it good fun. It's just like, if you're gonna rag me, at least tell me what you're ragging me about, so I can know. And there's times when I'm wrong. Or look, guys, it's early for the season for us. We're not beat writers. This isn't our full time job. We get some names wrong or miss stuff on depth charts. We study as much of this stuff as we can, but we really like to say that by mid season I think we do a good job right now, but by mid-season we do a really, really good job, and we watch as much football as we can to get up to speed. That's the only way we really have to do it. Something that keeps coming up is Ohio State's running backs versus Alabama's running backs, and I think this is in line with the super chat. I'm going to make you answer this question first because you always make me answer first. Who do you think right now has the better running back room between Ohio State and Alabama?
I think it's Alabama. I like what I saw in that one just rocket play from Travion, but I don't think that Master Teague or mine would be in the top 4 of the depth chart of Alabama. And I'm not sure that Brian Robinson, who started, is in the top 3 in the running back room at Alabama at the end of the year. That's a deep running back room. But again, and somebody pointed out that Alabama's offensive line missed some blocks today. They did. In the run blocking, I was a little concerned if I'm an Alabama fan. What I saw, pass protection was awesome. But you pointed out that Miami was not a great run defense last year and really bottled Alabama up a little bit.
It's a little hard to evaluate there because Alabama did have their starting right tackle was unavailable, and they shifted things around. And I don't know the names and numbers well enough to track it, but I knew by around halftime when they were trying to run the clock out, they were very clearly moving guys around, because I saw Chris Owens, who started at right tackle, I noticed was playing center at one point. I think I noticed it because he got banged up and came out, but that showed the fact they were screwing around. But yeah, I agree with you. I still don't think Brian Robinson's probably going to end up the main back for Alabama. Their backups, and it's the same. Be clear, it's the same deal that Ohio State has, right? Ohio State's backs in the starting order, which we said in our preview video, were Teague and then Williams and then Henderson, and we knew the third string back is probably the most talented back, and we know he's going to get there. But the thing is, in that Minnesota game, if you put him in and he fumbled the ball away at the wrong moment, that would have lost Ohio State the game. That's why you don't play freshmen in key positions in those early games, and you make them prove they're reliable in pass pro so they don't give up a strip sack, or in the running game, they don't fumble early on. Alabama's in the same position, though. They've got 3 5-star tailbacks in their depth chart beyond Robinson. And honestly, there's going to be some serious dudes there, and there's a lot of depth on it.
All the Ohio State fans are losing their mind in the chat about how wrong we are, as if Alabama is some scrub team that can't recruit a running back. Mine would not start at Alabama. He won't start for Ohio State by week 5. I mean, come on. His 74-yard touchdown, he ran the wrong way. Y'all go back and look at it. He ran opposite of protection incorrectly. It was just that Minnesota had sold out on the protection they saw, so the backside was completely uncovered. I don't think he's a bad running back, but we're talking about Alabama, not Alabama State. Like, that running back room is full of 5-stars who aren't getting on the field. So no, I don't think.
And you're right. The reaction in the chat is interesting. Let me take a step back and try to they're the 3 best running back rooms in the country. Would you agree with this? The 3 best running back rooms in the country are Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama.
Correct.
No doubt. It's those 3. And if you take major offense to one of those being worse than the others, I think, frankly, you're a little off base. It is not clear which of those 3 is good. They all have high 4-star, 5-star tailbacks. Alabama has two guys that on a straight line can do what Henderson did, I think. I mean, they had the Wheaton kid as a recruit that was supposed to go to Oklahoma and then flipped, and he was like an absolute rocket himself. And then Georgia's got like Cook and Milton and McKenzie. I'm drawing a blank. They've got several guys themselves behind Zamir White that are, and one of them in particular is kind of a rocket. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of depth at all three of those. And saying that one is better than the other is not saying that the other one's bad. It's basically saying that all three of those schools have probably are going to have multiple tailbacks. Put it this way, all three of those schools will have multiple tailbacks that will probably start an NFL game. All three of them have that. They're just loaded compared to the rest of college football. And I'm also not saying Henderson's bad because he might fumble or will fumble. I'm saying head coaches are not going to use a freshman 5-star tailback as the starter in week 1 because they're worried he might. They're going to play a couple games where they get to work him in against lesser competition in a not close game. And once they confirm that he doesn't have ball security issues or pass pro issues or et cetera, then he will become probably the starter or your main tailback. But that won't happen until later. That was our only point, that in that one Minnesota game, it was probably too early for him to be a major factor.
Yeah, and Williams for Alabama fumbled today. We didn't see him the rest of the game, and he's really good. We missed a super chat we want to call out from Dylan Sampson. Can we compare Ohio State struggles to other top 15 teams? I can't this year because I still feel like Ohio State struggled and had a double-digit win. We're seeing other top 15 teams lose to unranked teams, or other top 15 teams struggling with Tulane. So no, I can't really compare it because I think Ohio State, even in their struggles, is still so far out in front of so many other teams.
Yeah, and again, I'm just going to respond on the comment before I turn, but somebody's like, we said 2 of the running backs would make the team. No, we were saying Mayan Williams probably wouldn't start for Alabama, and Brian Robinson wouldn't start for Ohio State.
Right.
Like the guys that are starting for those schools are because they're experienced, but both of them have more talent as backups than they have as starters. And if they transferred, like if the starters transferred and they were new to both schools, they'd be buried.
Ohio State struggled against a team that will win 10 games. I don't know that that's true because Minnesota lost really the heart of that offense. They don't have a great quarterback. Tanner Morgan's he's decent. He's not great. I don't know that they're a 10-game winner this year with that injury. Maybe they were with him, and he played most of that game. So maybe that's a fair comment, but I'm not entirely sure. I want to shout out Javari Williams for the super chat with no question. If you have a question or a comment, throw it in there. We'll address it. And then another one. Jill is on it tonight, by the way. Josh's wife is letting us know when we miss one. Bama is the better team until proven otherwise, potentially later this year. Michael letting us know with the super chat. And that's what we said earlier. And I don't know if you were on, Michael, but what we said was there's a couple of teams that historically and this year have the chance to get a lot better and at the end of the year be there with Alabama, even if they're not there right now. And that's Ohio State and Oklahoma. Maybe not Georgia, based on what we saw offensively tonight. But we've seen this from Ohio State year after year where they struggle out of the gate, or they're a little sluggish, and over the course of the year they get better. What I liked, and Josh, what I'd like for you to touch on with the Ohio State thing, we've always talked about how we like Ryan Day more than Meyer because you won't get the knucklehead loss. I could have totally seen this Minnesota game in the Urban Meyer era go really sideways midway through the third quarter, and they end up actually losing that game. And that's where I'll give credit to Ryan Day.
Yeah, I agree with it. I mean, the first thing you have to note, I talked about this. You can back it up during the game when we were texting back and forth. That game was close to being 20-0 Ohio State in the first half. Minnesota went for it on fourth down. They got it. And they also had that is the interception, right? They got called back on a penalty. If those things don't happen, that game is out of reach. It reminded me in a lot of ways of the Alabama Ole Miss game that everybody spent the entire season talking about how flawed Alabama was off that game. But we kept trying to reiterate to people, but Alabama would score. I mean, they would get a first down every 2 plays. And when they had the ball, it wasn't really a struggle. And Ole Miss kind of had to have everything go right offensively to be able to score and move the ball the way they did. And like if Ole Miss didn't hit a couple of the fourth, they went for it on fourth down several times and stuff like that. And if they didn't hit them, or if they'd thrown an interception, they would have been out of the game. Minnesota was the same way in that Ohio State game. I don't think those two teams are particularly close in quality. And that game was way closer to being an Ohio State blowout than a Minnesota win in a lot of ways. And I also think, like you said, Ryan Day showed up there because they did get stuff back together, and they did really turn it around in the second half and grounded themselves. But Ohio State's better than that score, and the closeness of that game indicates, I think. Yeah, you probably want to mention the UCLA game. It's kind of getting
crazy. And tougher for our LSU by 21 fan, Joshua B., who did hit us up with a super chat. Tough situation right now with UCLA going up by 18. We talked about going into this game that we saw some things we really liked against Hawaii, even though it was Hawaii. We were concerned with DTR not looking great at all, but there was a chance, and I think this is kind of proving to be true. Two things. One, there was a chance that they were sort of hiding a lot of their offense, and they did shut that down halfway through the second quarter. And two, I got to give kudos to UCLA fans for showing up. They didn't last week, and there was some concern that it was just going to be an LSU dominant crowd. They showed up. Crowd's there tonight. It's packed house. But talk a little bit about DTR and what we think or what we thought about them maybe hiding a lot of their offense.
Yeah, that Hawaii game, they were up on Hawaii quick. They were totally dominant defensively when they wanted to be early. They never really had anything to fear from Hawaii. And I think, look, Kelly from the onset has always been, some people would call it a gimmick. Some people would call it a system. I think you can call it more just creative offensively. College teams don't get the opportunity to perfect defensive play and to study film to the extent that they know the ins and outs of every opponent on the schedule. And if you are really creative offensively in college, where you do schemes that are unusual, and especially when you start leveraging the differences in rules, like the 3-yard rule that allows you to do the RPO that doesn't exist in the NFL, you can be really successful. They hit a lot of that stuff. And DTR is not a great passer, and he hasn't been a great passer in this game. But I think what people underestimated is, okay, but if UCLA wants to have a balanced rushing attack where they use DTR as a runner and then they throw off it, you get like the 75-yard touchdown where they answered LSU early in the game, right? Where it's just, he's just hitting a wide open guy. And that got them rolling. And they've been able to lean on that ground game until LSU's just kind of broke. But I will be honest, and I know I doubt we're going to have any LSU fans in our chat. We've probably pissed them all off.
We got one. He gave us
I'm not trying to be a hater. Like, I don't hate LSU. This is just what I thought might happen. And it's still very much a possibility that LSU is closer to the team they were last year, which was not a great football team and was really not a great defensive football team. I still don't know what to judge UCLA and LSU, but my concern was if LSU didn't improve substantially, a team that is a more gimmick-based team that has just a consistent rushing attack could very well kind of blow them out, and that's kind of seems to be where we're headed. We got Farino, yeah. And I'll also thank LW that you'll put them up in a minute, but gave us a super chat just for a little bit of money with no question.
I actually thank LW in the chat too. Mike gave us a quick note on OSU back when we were talking about Ryan Day, and I do want to get back to the LSU game, but yes, it's not just the knucklehead losses; it's that they were blowout losses. Purdue, Iowa, these were games where Ohio State was in contention for a playoff or BCS berth or whatever, and they're getting bombed by some unranked team. And we said the day Ryan Day was announced, the thing we love about what he brings to the table is we think he will change the culture in that locker room to where you don't see that anymore. That doesn't mean he's going to be bringing home a ton of hardware, maybe not, but we wouldn't see that. So there was a comment. Here it is. I'm going to put it up. Yes, we are going to take a victory lap. Really just in the form of bumping all the comments that just dragged us this week. And this is the thing. Like when we take an L, and we will take an L on Clemson, Georgia, we'll go out and say, look, we missed this. This is what we were wrong about. We did it in 2018 when Clemson beat Alabama. We talked about all the things that we missed. That's the burden we have of running a channel like this. And we don't really dunk on people that much when we take victory laps. We try to minimize it a little bit, but we got dragged, y'all, so much this week by LSU fans. And it's not when people disagree with us. I don't care about that. It's when Josh or me makes a point and then people are like, oh, you need to watch more fill in the blank team football. Ohio State fans got at us a little bit this week about that. Y'all don't realize that for the average Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, LSU fan, we actually watch your team play more than you do. People don't understand that. And that's not a victory lap or a dunk. It's just that's what's frustrating when we get those kind of comments. So, Josh.
And when he says that, because I don't want it to come across too long, what he's saying is, I have probably watched every LSU game for the past year 2 to 3 times. Right. Every LSU game, every single one. I've probably watched every Ohio State game. I've watched them all at least once, and I've probably watched most of them multiple times. And some of them we go back and forth on YouTube watching over and over again. So like we've watched a crap ton of the major teams.
So just to transition a little bit to, we opened talking a lot about Alabama. And there's been a number of comments here recently about Bryce Young, and I did think he had decent poise. I think that someone said he takes a little bit of a minute to see the field and make decisions, and I'd agree with that. Just in general, since we've been going for a couple of hours, and maybe there's a lot of people that didn't hear it, talk through kind of your thoughts on Bryce Young today in his first start at Alabama.
The thing that impressed me the most with Bryce Young was really his ability to create and make it look natural in the offense. He, a lot of times in the pocket, would maneuver, step forward in the pocket, find a seam, move, and like just sort of run lateral to the line of scrimmage, keep his eyes up, and throw the ball. I give him credit for keeping his eyes up. There are a couple times he probably should have run and slid, but protect your body more doing it that way. And he got run down, I think maybe strip sacked once in that game doing it, being a little too slow. But man, some of the throws he's making, he's actually running right and throwing across his body to the left. There are not many quarterbacks that can do that. And I really feel like he's kind of plays like a cross between Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield. And I don't mean that to say the best of both, but sort of the halfway point. He doesn't quite have Murray's athleticism or arm strength, but he's more accurate and consistent and moves around in the pocket a little more like Mayfield did, and he's a little more dynamic. But it's the same sort of ability to float around, find a guy, and then sort of zip it in that a lot of those Oklahoma quarterbacks have been. He's in the same mold.
So, got to call out another super chat, huge one this time from the block. Many thanks on that, and I think it's a good talking point. And Josh, I'll kind of let you run with this because I've been doing some monologues here lately. Do we need more parity at the top for the sake of the brand? If so, how does that happen? I'll throw one comment in there and then let you run with it. There's always been kind of dominant teams that have runs throughout the history of college football. And when Saban leaves, we're probably going to see that end at Alabama, at least to some extent. But in general, I'd love for you to address this question, 2 questions really, because it's a really good one.
I think the lack of parity at the top of college football has been bad for the sport. And a lot of the complaints have come from the fact that you see the top teams winning too much. Now, there's sort of 2 ways to take parity at the top, meaning are the teams at the top more equal, or do there need to be more teams moving up? And I I'll try to address that in two parts, given the nature of the super chat. At the top, I think it would be ideal if you could see 8-ish teams get to the top and rotate more. Like Georgia and Alabama switching off more, Georgia, Alabama, LSU switching off more, I guess. Like Auburn, when they were big, was 2013, the year before the playoffs. So we've never seen them in a playoff game. And they used to be fairly frequently showing up at the top of the SEC. And Florida State, Miami not being a factor versus Clemson, I think you can take that side of it and say, really, it's not about parity at the top of college football nationally. You can almost take it to say parity at the top of each conference, right? We need to see more teams competing for conference championships. And we love to rag on the SEC and talk about them being just Alabama's conference. But frankly, I think Alabama's had a lot more competition. If you want to point the finger, I think the bigger problem isn't Alabama and how dominant they are, because they're getting in just because they've been the best program by far in the past 10 years. It's the Michigans and the Florida States and the Miamis and Texas, all these programs, second-tier programs in the other major conferences aren't challenging Oklahoma and Clemson and Ohio State on a regular basis. And that's why things are messed up at the top. We can do anything people want to suggest to try to change the playoff system. Maybe expanding gives a little more exposure for those teams that they can get better athletes. But frankly, I don't even know that it's an athlete recruiting problem. I think it's a coaching problem. It's an investment problem. And there's a lot of every one of those. The problems at Michigan is very different than the problems at Florida State, are very different than the problems at Texas. And I don't know that there's any one-size-fits-all solution. I think it's just a matter of, for the sake of the sport, you almost need to root for some of those rivals to get better.
Yeah, and that's like Ohio State loves the fact that they have really put Michigan in the corner. But for the health of college football, Michigan needs to be better. So I'll take this one. Gelato, thanks for the super chat. It's a good question too. Better QB right now, Bryce Young or JT Daniels? I loved what I saw tonight from JT Daniels in regards to decisiveness. I think he has a pretty good command of Monken's offense, and I think that he's got a live arm. I think he's back from the ACL, pretty good. His ceiling is so much lower than Bryce Young's, though. And as it matters within the function of their offense, I'm not sure that Bryce Young could be less than what JT Daniels is and still put up more points against the same defense, because I think the parts around him, including offensive line, are better. But in general, I think it's more about that ceiling than it is really who's better right now. What do you think, Josh?
I could agree with that. If you made Bryce Young stand in the pocket and not in a collapsing pocket and throw to targets downfield in a traditional offense, I'm not sure that he would necessarily be better than JT Daniels at that. But if you took JT Daniels and Bryce Young and you put them in Alabama's RPO offense that's functioning with good blocking at a high level, I think that you will end up seeing Bryce Young be a lot more effective in that kind of an offense. So I agree with you. I think the ceiling from Young is a lot higher. And realize Young just made his first career start, and Daniels started half a season, and he started a full season at USC. He's way older than Young. So I do think Young is going to pass Daniels pretty quick. It's what we said when we were talking about Heisman favorites and top tens. One of Stroud or Young was probably going to be top 2 or 3 in the Heisman. I won't say by default, but Uiagalelei and Stroud and Young, one of those guys was almost destined to be your Heisman favorite. Right now, I think it's Young, just because those high-level recruits tend to have a pretty good rate of panning out.
I had to the Ed Orgeron footprints in the sand, very famous kind of Christian Bible reference is hilarious here, because this is kind of what we've said since Ed Orgeron set foot on campus. I had to touch on that because it's freaking hilarious. But we also got a super chat from Jafari, who gave us one earlier, I believe, and didn't have a question. Last super chat was was for the LSU fans ghosting us. Um, where do you guys watch your games? I'm outside the US. Most services are hit or miss for me. YouTube is the absolute best place to watch any of these games. So I don't get to, I don't know about you, Josh, but for me on Saturdays, I watch what I can. I've got 3 kids, 2, 4, and 6 years old. So I do watch a lot of football, but a lot of times it's on Sunday or it's Monday morning before work starts or after my kids go to sleep on YouTube. A lot of these full game replays get posted. And the thing I love about them the most is you can use your left and right arrow keys to jump back and forth, and you can hit the same spot in a play 4, 5, 6 times in a row without having to find it on a slider. And I know that sounds silly, but like being able to hit that arrow key and repeat a play over and over and over again to see what was happening is so much better than watching it had you recorded it on your DVR.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the ACC puts up condensed versions of their games, and that is super helpful for us because we can watch several games, and we talk about like we watch the games multiple times. It's how we're able to do it. I will say this is something we talked about a lot. Well, let me answer the question first to make sure I am. So that's how we try to rewatch them. How do we watch them live? I wish I had a better answer, but it's just cable. I may switch to a streaming service. I'm playing around. I don't know if I'm going to go Fubo TV or YouTube TV. My wife's probably sitting here watching, and she's like, "I thought we decided this." But
my dad recently went to YouTube TV and canceled it immediately. He said it was too much of a struggle for live sports, especially. He had some problems with it, but Fubo seems to be everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to YouTube TV last year and kept it, and I ended up for a bit, and then switched back for other reasons related to just basically cost more than anything, and that bundle I had. But Fubo, I actually thought YouTube TV was slick, and the ability to record everything was nice. But Fubo TV has the ability to do multi-view on Apple TV, which is nice for me because I do multi-view with ESPN on that. Yeah, Apple TVs, you can do multi-view and have 4 games up at once, only on ABC or Disney properties. But on Fubo, because it's any channel, I could do any game I want. That's nice to me. I've already forgotten what the other thing was I was going to say. That's fine.
How we watch games. But we've got another couple of super chats rolling in. Avi gave us one earlier. I want to call it out in chat, but I want to call it out even though I don't think there was a question. And then Dylan with another one. How do we think Stroud will develop this season? I think we saw that a lot of his development has already happened. This is just a theory in that Ryan Day didn't want to turn him loose if he didn't have to against Minnesota, knowing that he had to play Oregon the next week. So in the second half, we saw a lot of that. Although Josh made a good point in our preview that we got killed for, that in the spring game, he overthrew a lot of people. The accuracy wasn't quite there. I think that'll come. Some of that looked like nerves to me. That's my thoughts on that one. Avi asked about Olave's Heisman chances. Josh, why don't you take that one?
Yeah. My comment on Stroud sort of impacts Olave. Stroud is at his best, I think, when you use him as an athlete in an RPO scheme with a run threat that has the ability to throw the ball to anywhere in the field. And I don't mean that he can make every throw, but I mean he has the arm to hit anywhere on the field. So the whole field is open. And you want to get guys pretty open. And that's how they beat Minnesota, right? I mean, they had really open receivers, and those guys are able to torch them for 80 yards. Olave is really smooth and can really help take advantage of those opportunities. But where I think he differs from somebody like Devontae Smith, and you have to remember wide receivers winning the Heisman is borderline unheard of, is Smith was explosive. And I think Olave is really, really smooth and the kind of guy that you want to rely on as an offense. But I'm not so sure that you can hit him on a slant or something and he's just going to toast everybody on defense, because that's what Smith did. I mean, like the Ohio State game, there were a lot of plays that were just motioning Smith back and forth and then releasing him and throwing to him, and the Ohio State corner couldn't stay with him. And that's the problem for Olave, is he doesn't quite have that same burst and explosiveness, change of direction and shiftiness. He's really, really smooth and can be ultra productive. But to win the Heisman, you got to be a little notch higher. And then when you pair it with the fact that I don't think Stroud can – I'm not sure Stroud is the technician at quarterback to make complete use of Olave's skill set to get open and get separated in a traditional passing game. I think it limits him a little bit too much.
Yeah, I think too, like you said, it's so hard for a wide receiver to win, because even looking at Alabama with Smith, that was sort of a rarity. But, with Olave, you've got Garrett Wilson on the other side. I mean, he's going to get his too. And you've got good tight ends. They're going to get theirs too. Chris Tyree winning the Heisman. Just wanted to call out Brendan and say thanks for the super chat. Chris Tyree's not going to win the Heisman. And you also have Kyron Williams there, which is worth pointing out. And we had one more. Y'all, the super chats are coming so fast that I am having a hard time keeping up. So we've got one here. This is a good question. Worst loss: Montana over UW or ETSU blowout of Vandy? I mean, I think it's got to be, Josh, the team that was expected to be actually good this year losing, right?
Yeah. Well, and again, Montana didn't play football last year. So maybe they're way better than we anticipate or something. And they're a pretty good – I would say Montana is historically a pretty good FCS program. I'm actually looking up right now, Eastern Tennessee State football 2020. I don't even know what happened with them in 2020. It's a 2021 schedule. That's not helping me. They went 4-2. East Tennessee State went 4-2 last year. They beat Samford. They beat the Citadel. I mean, they weren't a bad team. Yeah, they beat number 10 VMI. They lost to Mercer, and they lost to Furman. But they were at the end of the season, they were actually ranked in FCS. They're a pretty good team too. And Vandy, like you said, is one. They actually played last year, and Vandy had. I have nothing against Derek Mason, but I'm just going to speak truth. They ran that program into the ground. Vandy has never been competitive in the SEC. I do not, in my lifetime, have never seen Vandy this uncompetitive. They are really, really bad. That roster is completely devoid of talent, and it's now a total rebuild job. Washington had expectations, so I think that's definitely the worst loss.
Yeah. And goodness, I'm trying to keep up with all of the super chats. Let me see. I think I missed one.
If we've missed the super chat, please just say, hey, I did a super chat. This was my question. We'll be maybe a little better prepared for that next time. I don't think we anticipated it. And guys, I want to say I really appreciate it.
I do too. I appreciate the showing tonight. So here's the thing, and y'all let us know, should we keep doing this Saturday night thing? We didn't know if everybody would be watching football and not interested in hopping on. We didn't know if it would be just tumbleweed flowing through here, or if y'all would really like it because it's, right adjacent to the games. And of course now the super chats are rolling again. So I'll stop my monologue. Let you take this one, Josh. Super chat from Bruce. Bama's culture is what separates them. Nick plays the best players, and Bama doesn't play down to the level of the competition. You can run with that one.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of truth to it. I mean, Alabama recruits at a high level, and it all builds on itself. The only way for a team to recruit at a high level the way they do year in and year out is to promise every player that comes in that we will play you if you're the best player, and then follow through with it. I think certain schools, Georgia being one of them, have had issues before where they brought in guys that were elite recruits that maybe were better than the guys in front of them, like Justin Fields, and when you don't play them, they transfer, and then that hurts you down the line. I think Saban has done a very good job of following through with it and not necessarily. You can play favorites or play the experience card, like we talked with running back, to say you don't want to have a freshman running back in game one in a close game because he might fumble. That's one thing. But it's another thing to say, but I'm not going to work that guy in so he's a starter by midseason. And I think Ryan Day will do the same thing. I think you'll see him play some of those young players and try to work them in. And then by middle of the year to end of the year, they'll be in starting positions. All right. We got a lot of these to get burned through.
Yeah, Lamar gave us a super chat, and Lamar's a friend of the program. He's been around for a long time, y'all. And he, of the LSU fans that are on here, he gives great comments every time we post. And he doesn't just watch the LSU game, previews we do. He watches everything. LSU sold its soul for the spread and kind of changing the DNA of who they were. And what he talks about says, I'm not looking for 19 LSU. I'm looking for 18 and previous. I think there's some truth to that. I think that what I always loved about the LSU teams through the Saban era and the Les Miles era was just how hard-nosed, hard-hitting, you felt that game as a fan. You felt tired after watching someone play LSU because it was just a hard-fought game. And it does seem like they've lost a little bit of that identity in DNA. But Soldier Soul or not, you got the hardware. So it's really tough to be too mad about it, right, Josh?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing isn't so much that they sold their soul by moving to the spread. I think moving to the spread was a good thing. I think it's they moved to the spread and they had Brady that installed a system that was right for the personnel they had. And like we had a lot of conversations offline of this, and I am really critical right now of the LSU program, but I'm trying not to be critical in a way that makes everyone think I just hate them. I don't. I was really concerned when Orgeron kept talking about how they're going to bring back the Joe Brady offense because they don't have Joe Burrow. You can't run the same offense without those pieces that you had. You have to adapt to the pieces you have instead, and you've got to figure out where you can be aggressive and conservative. And I'll tell you the thing that's crushing LSU more than anything else, their offensive line is not very good.
Right.
When they lost Dare Rosenthal was a serviceable left tackle, maybe a pretty good one. They didn't really have a right tackle. They lose him to Kentucky. Deculus gets hurt in this game. They don't have tackles. And Max Johnson is not Joe Burrow by any stretch of the imagination. But I think he shows signs that can be a pretty good quarterback. But you've got to kind of simplify the game for him and know the fact that you've got elite skill athletes and not try to be as explosive, but just try to leverage the talent you have and make simple plays to make them basically get the ball out quick and run a different style of offense that fits your players. And that's where I think LSU's real failing.
I do want to touch on this real quick because a lot of people called us out this week for talking up what we saw from Brennan last year and how we thought that was a really crushing blow to LSU. A lot of people said that Max was the starter anyway, and Brennan was going to sit the bench. Based on what I saw tonight, I don't believe that. What do you think?
I don't really believe it either. I think Max makes some plays where you're like, yeah, you can see where this guy has the moxie and all, but he also still looks like a player that's really young, and he makes some negative plays at the wrong time. He had a nasty, I know at least a nasty fumble in that game that you'd like not to see. So I think that's right. Or maybe it went down as an interception. I don't know. Yeah, I agree with you. I never really completely bought that.
So Edward with the super chat, thank you. These data points, UCLA over LSU, Montana over UW, how does that factor into your model? I mean, that is tough because if you think about like our model, so I think UCLA LSU will be good data for our model. Montana over UW might be a little trickier.
Yeah. We don't actually use FCS teams in our model.
Right, and that's my point.
Like, I don't know. It's almost bad. Our model is going to have to ignore it. There's a reason for that, guys, because we feed this data into our model, right? And it looks at how you did on that against that team, and then it looks at how that team did against everybody else, and it's all very competitive. FCS teams play like one FBS team, and so you killed the FCS team, and they were competitive in all their other games. but that's not really true because there was a different division. So we throw those SES games out entirely because I find they make the data worse, not better, almost universally. Even if I included the Montana data, it probably makes it look worse, not better, because it looks like they just lost a weird game. By the way, have you looked at we got to get through super chats, but you should actually pull up the stat line of the Washington game. It's crazy that they lost that game.
I will have to look at that. Mike Farino with the super chat. Thank you. Do I think Rattler's Heisman hopes for the most part died today? No. They still scored 40 points. The problem was a little bit of sputtering in the offense in the second half. But did you see what else happened in college football this week? So, no, Oklahoma's going to be there at the end. And maybe their defense isn't great, but I think you had a Heisman winner in 2018 with a pretty horrible defense. So, no, even with the 2 interceptions, Rattler's going to throw some interceptions, and he's going to throw the ball 15 times in a game that you see that are just like, oh my God, that was amazing. So no, I don't think he's out.
Yeah, no, I don't think this really hurts him, the Heisman, at all. They won the game. It's not going to be blamed on Rattler. And if they start playing well the next few weeks, if you like Mississippi State with La Tech, if you win those games at the end of the day, you're not going to really be dinged for the fact that it was a close game.
So
if you play better later.
College Football Geek, who is also one of these crossovers where we get a lot of great traction and talking on Twitter. Speaking of Kentucky, they looked better on offense today. Yes, it was ULM. Yeah, I mean, I think Kentucky had over 400 yards passing. I haven't watched that game yet. I did see the stat lines in there, and yes, it was ULM. But look, Kentucky is the team, Josh, that you called out this week on Twitter as being one of those teams that is maybe overlooked. I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah, they had a lot of pieces that were missing, and they got them. I mean, this is where the transfer portal comes in big, right? They get Rosenthal from LSU, that was LSU's former starting left tackle. They get the best receiver from Nebraska, Wan'Dale Robinson. They get a transfer quarterback, Will Levis, from Penn State. They're shoring up their positions of need, and they've got a lot of other sound pieces. They've been good defensively, and they've had a good core for a while. They just haven't had the skill players, and they kind of shored it up. I think Kentucky is easily one of the most underrated teams nationally right now, or at least has the potential to be. It won't shock me if that ends up being a ranked team. And it will not shock me if they end up, for example, like being better than Florida this year. Yeah, I think that's a really sharp. And College Football Geek has his own YouTube channel, and it's really good stuff. So you guys should check it out. But that's a really good comment. I agree with it.
I think we're getting into crazy town right now. Oklahoma might lose to the Jayhawks this year. I mean, unless Ohio State changed their mascot to the Jayhawks, I don't know what you're talking about, because I think that they stormed the field for a win over an FCS team last night, and it was close. Y'all are way overreacting to this Tulane game. Yes, there are some concerns. Tulane's offense is very good. It's very good. And if you look at the points per relative to the yards per play and the total yards that Oklahoma gave up, it was a bit of an aberration. Like I'm not panicking right now if I'm Oklahoma. Now, compared to Alabama, that's a concern, but they don't need to be compared to Alabama until the end of the season. So y'all don't overreact on that. Come on.
Yeah. Now, I'm not sure your sarcasm meter is not just broken. I'd like to think he's being facetious, but
I hope so.
I think they'll come back around. Yeah. And by the way, I will note, I didn't think Max Johnson looked terrible in the LSU game. I thought he looked fine. But Miles Brennan looked really good to start the year last year for LSU. I think that's one of the most forgotten things is their defense was horrid, which is why they lost to Mississippi State. But the reason it was a close game is that Miles Brennan was playing pretty darn well.
I'll go so far as to say that, like, I think Miles Brennan would start at Georgia right now.
Yeah, I think there's a pretty good shot of it if he was healthy. And it's not a shot on Daniels even. And Brennan is just an underratedly good quarterback. He was pretty good, a
And
lot
he's
better
been
than I
there for like
expected.
9 years. Like he's got a lot of time in the system. We've got another super chat to talk about. Bruce, Ohio State fan, guessing from the avatar. Tired of seeing Alabama and Clemson win titles. Look, so I like that you've included Clemson. I think we're seeing a little bit of a disruption from Clemson because look, they've played two good teams in a row. They've lost both of them, double digits both times. Maybe Clemson is on the downswing and somebody else can fill that spot. Maybe it's Ohio State. But we're 2 years removed from LSU winning a national championship, right? If Ohio State fans are tired of Alabama and Clemson winning, beat Alabama and Clemson. And I say that because, like, it's funny because people used to hate Nick Saban. Like, they hated him. And now they all respect him, even though he's winning every year and they're sick of him. So I don't know that it's – I think that having that Darth Vader, Death Star, bad guy in Alabama is good for college football in a lot of ways because when they lose, it's a huge deal. I agree. I want more parity. I want an Ohio State to win. I want I thought it was great that LSU won, but y'all got to go out and beat them. And the thing is, Ohio State and Georgia are recruiting at really close to the level of Alabama, so they don't have much of an excuse, right?
Yeah. And again, this is what I was talking about with parity with other teams, and you guys are giving us so many questions. I'm getting cut off. That's fine though. I'll take it. People don't want to look at me anyway. Every school is unique in what they need to do, and I think Bruce was acknowledging that. I think what you've got to do is start to build your program around beating the elites. And one of the problems for a lot of these schools, and I think Georgia's fallen into this trap, is they build their program around beating teams that are worse than them a lot of times. And even in this game, honestly, we've said that don't overreact to Clemson being terrible or number 9 or what have you. But a lot of that was really due to the fact that, look, like we talked about doing a top 10 right now, and we're not doing it because I don't even know who I'd put 6 to 10. Like in the list, if you guys want in the comments or to think about it, try to do a top 10 with all 10 teams because 6 to 10 is hard because there were not 10 teams that look good right now. But Georgia may have beaten Clemson because they're not elite. And Georgia usually wins games against teams at a lower talent level, and then they struggle with teams that have really, really dynamic offenses because they're not building themselves to win a playoff. And I think Ohio State's fallen into the same trap where they've, for years, especially under Meyer, they ran an offense that was great to get to the playoffs, not good to win it. If Alabama has, I think, retooled with the RPO in the playoff era, like when they hired Kiffin and all, to win a playoff. And Oklahoma runs the kind of offense you want to run a playoff, but the defense isn't there. In large part, it's because they don't recruit anywhere near the same level. So what the teams need to do is start making sure you're building a team to be where you need to be at the end of the year and not doing what most coaches do, which is building a team to get to where you want to be at the end of the year. Because the playoff changes the dynamic entirely. The type of team that wins the playoff and what you need to get to the playoff are actually very different equations, different offenses, different stuff like that.
Michael came in with a super chat on the model. And how about a placeholder for the above average FCS team? Maybe some historical average. I mean, and that gets a little bit away from what the model is. And there's so much junk data from FCS that it's even hard to know who is an above average FCS team. And still, there's so much of a gap between relevant data for top teams, which is usually what we cover week to week, and the top are good FCS teams, that it's going to do more harm than good in terms of our model. And I think that the thing is, this goes back to, Vanderbilt losing and Washington losing, but it also means we're not going to be covering those teams this year. Like we might do a Michigan Washington game, but at this point, like that also takes them, given our attention span and ability to get stuff done, that takes them out of the running for discussion anyway. So it really doesn't impact our model that much.
Yeah, it really, the problem is, like, we build up a profile, if you will, of each team, and Montana's games are all going to be mostly against FCS teams. So I can't build up an FBS equivalent profile, if you will, because all their data points are FCS data points against FCS teams. And however many passing yards you had in this game, interceptions, whatever, all the stuff, the things we happen to use in the model, at least, most of them don't have any relevance. So it's incomparable. Somebody mentioned, I want to jump in. Somebody mentioned, like I said, the spread offense, like Meyer versus Day. But bear in mind, like when Meyer won a championship in 2014, Alabama had just transitioned to the spread. They had Blake Sims was an absolute like placeholder quarterback. Did a really good job for them, a lot better than I thought they would at the beginning of the year. But Ohio State was way more talented than Alabama in 2014 and probably even 2015. And 2015 kind of fell flat with that Meyer offense. And nearly lost. I mean, they beat Alabama and weren't favored to, but they were more talented than Alabama in 2014. If Alabama had a better quarterback, that they would have won that game probably, which I think says a lot about the offense they were running at the time.
So the block came in with another super chat. Thank you again. Bearcats, if they run the tables, if Cincy runs the table, and we said this going into the season, that the difference between Cincinnati this year and last year is they have opportunities against maybe not great P5s, but good enough P5s to show who they are. My biggest problem with Cincinnati even last year, you don't even have to have great Power 5 teams on your schedule. You need to dominate your G5 schedule first, and they didn't do that. They had a chance to on a big stage to show everybody they belong in the playoffs, and they beat Tulsa by 3 points. Sorry, that's not playoff worthy. If you're scraping by, getting a pick six, I think, late in the game to beat a Tulsa, you are not playoff worthy, and Alabama would have murdered them. Alabama murdered a healthy Georgia team, not the Georgia team that played Cincinnati. So there's that. Any other thought? But on this question, like, this is different. Josh, what do you think? Like, if they went out on this schedule, I mean, that's a lot different than what they had last year.
I mean, it really doesn't help them that Indiana just lost handily. It really doesn't. That's really unfortunate. And we are kind of the opinion that Notre Dame, I think, is going to struggle a little bit. I think their over-under win total is 8.5 from Vegas, and I probably would take the under, looking at their schedule. We'll know more when they play later in the week. I still don't know what they're actually going to look like. There's a lot of new pieces there.
But what if they dunk Indiana and Notre Dame, and neither one of them is better than like an 8-4 team? I still think that's good data.
If they go undefeated through their schedule and they are largely dominant, they should be in the playoffs.
Yeah,
with the schedule they have. We are usually anti G5 or whatever, but it's schedule based and performance based. I have no problem with an undefeated Cincinnati that soundly beats Indiana and Notre Dame and doesn't have a bunch of like super close wins against low level teams. I give you one or two. That's fine. Just not several. Sure, you should be in the playoff. I mean, the schedule's good enough to get there, especially with the landscape of football.
So David brought up a point, and I have to touch on it because it's been thoroughly debunked in the past, and I'm going to do it again. Alabama does not get breaks from the refs when you look at it over the course of the season. They actually get fewer breaks than any other team in college football. If you look at their opponent against penalties, they're usually one of the last. They're like 120th in the country, which is ridiculous because you know that everybody says Bama gets breaks from the refs. Bama out-talents everybody they play, which means their wide receivers are getting tugged on, their defensive linemen are getting held more than anybody else, yet they were flagged the least. In this game, that non-safety was the right call. He was outside of – when I first saw it, I thought it was a safety. He was outside the tackle, ball got past the line of scrimmage. That is textbook, not grounding, so that shouldn't have been a safety. I didn't think the guy got in. I don't think there was an obvious third replay that showed that he got in. In this game, there were two calls that I think that were real bad misses. One went Miami's favor, the pass interference that led to their first field goal. That was not defensive pass interference in any way, shape, or form. It wasn't even close. And then the other one was on an Alabama interception. The Alabama linebacker really should have gotten a targeting call, I thought, on a defensive player. But otherwise, I thought it was a pretty well called game.
Yeah, the something else we need to talk about in a second. I agree with you. I pulled it up. I mean, they were the last 2 years they were 98th and 86th in opponent penalty yards per game. So not particularly high, but their opponents don't get penalized very much. Part of it is when you're in big games, refs tend to keep their flags in their pocket in big games. Alabama is almost always a big game, so they don't actually have many penalties called for or against them. The most common thing with Alabama is people complain that Alabama gets away with holding, but by and large, when you watch Alabama and Ohio State play and whoever like Georgia play, you rarely see a holding on either team. And I think there were a couple years where Alabama never had they went like 13 games in a row without an opponent holding penalty. And it's just because they don't call holding in Alabama games because they're usually a big game. It's a common trend. So we were really vocal that we thought Nebraska-Illinois was a game between two really bad football teams. Texas, San Antonio just beat Illinois. UTSA just beat Illinois 37-30. So, yeah, I'm standing by my statement that Nebraska-Illinois was a really bad football game between two really bad teams, and Nebraska was just that bad. And I apologize, I don't have control of the super chat. Maybe Daniel can get it. There's a couple more super chats we need to catch.
Okay.
I know Wendell has one. Evan has one too. Do you think once the Georgia offense is healthy, Darnell, Tyke, maybe Pickens, they will gel? Define gel. You're not going to play Clemson defensively, so they're going to do well. It's just more a question of what you're going to look like when you play like Alabama, I think, or how effective you're going to be otherwise when you play some of these other teams. I don't think Georgia is going to wake up and be a juggernaut. I think they're going to put up a lot of points on some teams where they're overmatched, particularly because the run game is so strong. And I think it could be a false hope. I have often been really critical of 2013 Alabama as a team that was the kick six team that was prevented from winning a championship by the kick six. People forget they lost to Oklahoma. They got run on. One, I think their secondary had real issues that was hidden by the fact that not many teams in the SEC that year could throw. And second, they were really up and down offensively and defensively through the year. And the SEC was really, really weak that year. And I think it kind of hid some things, and people still don't acknowledge the faults. Georgia could be in a similar boat, I think, where they suddenly fix a lot of stuff, but the East is so bad. I don't think Florida is very good, and I think Kentucky might well be the second best team in the East, and I think they're merely maybe a ranked team. Georgia could end up looking a lot improved and it not matter come championship or playoff time. You want to read off the super chat? I'm going to lose my voice. Sorry, guys. It's 12:40 Eastern, so I'm going to lose steam here pretty soon. But I'm trying to go hard.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun, by the way. 2.5 hours, and we got questions flowing in and a lot to talk about. This is awesome. I know it's only week 1, but my initial impression is that the gap between Bama and everyone else is expanded somehow. I don't know that it's expanded. I think there are a couple of other teams that if they had midseason form could have looked pretty dominant against Miami as well. Georgia and Clemson played one another, so they didn't get the benefit of that. And Ohio State played a good team. I don't know that Minnesota might be on par with Miami. However, the matchups were different. And we talked about that in our preview with Alabama and Miami. We said Miami is a better team than they're going to show against Alabama because the matchups are just not there for Miami. So, yes, right now I think Alabama is a good clip better than everybody else. But, again, in 2014, they probably were in week 2 or 3 as well. 2013, the same thing. Things happen over the course of the season where teams do gel and they actually do the whole thing turns over a couple of times by the end of the season. So I don't think it's time to give up on this season as well, just thinking that it's academic for Alabama. I'll let you take the next super chat.
And I'll note too that we think Miami's probably a pretty good team, but they did move the ball on Alabama some. Alabama had a couple injuries, and we don't really know how good Miami is. So everything right, everything in football is relative to the team you're playing, and I think that's one of the hardest things for people to keep in mind. Like looking bad against a great team could mean you're better than almost anybody else. Like if you play Clemson playing Georgia and you lose close, Georgia may be the second best team in the country, and Clemson may be the fifth best team in the country. But they just happen to be playing each other. I mean,
And what happens
they
if
may be the
Bryce Young
rankings.
is hurt, right? Like, what happens if that happens? We don't
Yeah,
know, you know?
right. So like Alabama didn't play Clemson or Georgia today, and I don't
Mm-mm.
want to make too many conclusions off one game, especially with all the highs and lows. And Alabama plays very well in those openers, partly due to coaching and all, but it doesn't necessarily reflect their quality over the course of the season. And just because they're well prepared in the opener doesn't mean they'll be better prepared than an LSU in Game 11. LSU may catch up. Do you think they ever institute a second tier targeting? I mean, they really want to. And I think
They
there was
need
even
to.
a proposal on the table to do it. I think they probably end up doing it. It does create more problems, though, because you may end up with more ticky-tacky targeting calls that maybe shouldn't be called. But I personally think a 5-year there should be a 5-yard targeting. Like if you when guys are in a tough position where the running back goes low and you hit like face mask to face mask, that should be a 5-yard foul. I think it should be based off intentionality. If there was affirmative act to target, it should be 15 yards and maybe an ejection, and maybe it's 15 yards either way. But they shouldn't be ejecting players on unintentional targeting. I think some people know I'm a lawyer, and this is one of the big things they teach in law school when tort law, like when you sue somebody over negligence or being in an accident or something, trying to sue someone into changing their behavior only works if they meant to do it in the first place. Suing someone over an accident rarely has an effect. Like they do a lot of statistics on this, right? Like suing someone or especially criminalizing behavior like getting in a car accident really is effective if people don't want to be in a car accident. If it's accidental and it's something they're not trying to do, penalizing them for doing the thing they didn't mean to do doesn't make them incapable of having another accident because it is an accident. And I think that same thing applies with targeting. Criminalizing unintentional targeting doesn't reduce targeting. They need to criminalize intentional targeting.
Lamar came through with a super chat on LSU's loss to UCLA doesn't feel as bad as loss to Detroit. Look, UCLA, for all the data we have right now, UCLA is a good football team. So unless you thought that LSU was going to be a national champion this year, nothing else is off the table for LSU. I think UCLA, like you said, Josh, they have an artificial number of seniors, super seniors, and experience in that team. And whatever you want to say about Chip Kelly in the NFL, the guy's a good coach. He's got a good staff down there. So I picked UCLA with the full intention of thinking if my pick was right, that doesn't mean that LSU is bad. Are you in the same boat, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I said this over and over leading up to it, but if I pick a team to lose a game, then I hate that team, no matter if they're playing Alabama or Nebraska. In this case, I just thought UCLA was good. I don't see it as anything like the Troy game, which, if you don't know the history there, they had Matt Canada, and Ed Orgeron was upset with the number of motion penalties they had. They had a lot of jet sweeps and stuff. And so he told Canada, or forced Canada, to take all the motion elements out of their offense. And their offense just fell apart for a half. And they got down a couple scores because the defense wasn't great. And by the second half of the game, they started to come back, but it was too late. And they weren't able to complete the comeback. That was a very different sort of crippling, stupid loss. This was a loss against a good team that I think was a good program. And I've said on Twitter that I thought this would probably end up being a ranked team. I said that multiple times this week. I'm more concerned actually by the fact that LSU ran for 1.9 yards per carry. And the passing game was better than maybe I thought it might be, but UCLA wasn't a good secondary last year. I'm really concerned that LSU's offensive line is not good enough to hold up in conference. That's the thing that concerns me, not really the result otherwise.
So this is something. The only reason I pointed this comment out is this is something that you have long told Alabama fans on our channel about 2013 Alabama, who a lot of Alabama fans say, that fluke kick six cost us a national championship, when in reality, you don't think they would have beaten Florida State. And this is the first time I think somebody else has kind of agreed with you. So I want to let you touch on it a little bit.
Alabama had young corners that year. They had like a junior college corner. They had Cyrus Jones, I think, as a freshman. Mike Evans humiliated him all through. They won a shootout in 2013 with Johnny Manziel. But their secondary was not great. They had, I think, Clinton Dix was there, and he got injured. They lost a safety to injury, as I recall. And they had no pass rush. They didn't have any NFL caliber pass rushers. They just didn't play any teams that could really throw the ball. I don't think they really had any hope of beating that Florida State team that was way better throwing the ball than anyone they played, especially given the fact that A&M, who wasn't quite as good passing, really lit them up. I personally don't think they would have likely beaten Missouri, who was a great passing attack that year as well. That's just my personal opinion.
So Iceman said, if you had to put money on which former Saban assistant would finally beat him this season, I wouldn't put any money on any of them beating him this year. But the one that has the best chance would be Kirby Smart. People are saying Kiffin. Kiffin got his shot last year. It was a rainy game. Alabama didn't get the luxury of over-preparing for Ole Miss like Ole Miss did for Alabama. Everything fell perfectly for them in that game, and they still lost by, I don't know, 1 or 2 scores. Kiffin has said in camp this year that the defense is really bad, and it was bad last year. And I think Alabama's defense this year is so much deeper at crucial spots that Kiffin's not going to beat him this year. I think Georgia's got talent. Like, that's the only team in the country that, or at least a former Saban assistant, that's got the talent to match him. Somebody mentioned Sark. I think Sark would be the guy for me. If I'm giving more than this year, if I'm giving like long term, I could see Texas building enough talent in 1 to 2 years to really meeting them in the playoffs and winning.
I agree. I think Smart's the most likely, partly just because of how likely they are to continually meet. And I think he is doing a better job at Georgia. We had a whole video comparing Kirby Smart to Mark Richt. Smart does not get nearly enough credit for how good a job he's doing. It's really freaking hard to have a top 5 program on a consistent basis. It's really, really hard. And the fact that they can't beat Alabama, okay, Ohio State can't beat them either. I mean, they just happen to have to play them earlier. And then, they've lost some bowl games where they're disinterested or not looked as good in bowls. That happens all the time. But I am really doubtful that Ole Miss is going to be quite what some people expect because they are so Kiffin is really great at making matchups, but he doesn't have a first-round draft pick, Elijah Moore, and he doesn't have a great tight end in Yabota. I don't know that they're going to be the same team people think they will be.
I just want to call this out real quick. Somebody's talking about Miami covering him against Michigan State. I think it's pretty awesome on Miami's part that they're scheduling Alabama and Michigan State in the same year, like 2 Power 5 out of conference. Like, this is something that we think everybody should play 8-2, and then we don't care what you do with your other 2 teams. Like, you can play high schools. I don't care. That gives us enough relevant data out of conference to know not only how good you are, but your conference is. So I just want to call this out, say, like, this is pretty awesome on Miami's part.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta give him credit for doing that. I think I'm gonna, if it's cool with you, Daniel, I think I can go about 10 more minutes here.
Yep.
At 1 a.m. is about my call point.
Okay.
Are there any other than Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, and Ohio State that you guys want to talk about? Because I feel like we've talked about those teams for good reason ad nauseum.
I mean, here's one. Penn State, and this is a fair question that's come up given what we tweeted today about how boring the Penn State-Wisconsin game was. I'll say my bit, and I'll let you say yours after. I think there was a difference between Penn State and Wisconsin because, one, Penn State, Wisconsin's offenses have sucked for a while. They have been boring, what they used to, charge Alabama with, old man football for a long time. And that's not going to win you anything of significance. So I can maybe give Georgia and Clemson, Georgia's had a little bit of boring offense too, a little bit of benefit of the doubt because they've been able to put up points against good defenses in the past. For me to say that these are probably good defenses more on the Clemson, Georgia side and bad offenses more on the Penn State, Wisconsin side. Also, the play calling was a lot more dynamic in the second game. But maybe you see something different, but that's how I feel. I think that Georgia and Clemson could score on good defenses, and Penn State and Wisconsin showed me nothing today with their play calling.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the thing is, like, you can't throw out old data. I saw DJ Uyunglele play a really good Notre Dame defense last year and shred them. I did. I've never seen Sean Clifford and Graham Mertz shred a high-level defense in the passing game. So whatever we saw from Clemson, and I think their lines have some problems. Their offensive line, I think, has real problems. But those problems were a really horrible matchup against what I think Georgia does have the best group of interior linemen in the country. And it was a uniquely difficult issue for something where Clemson has a weakness. And that caused them to have a low score. I think Penn State's offense is more dynamic. I will say, I think their passing game is capable of, and they did create some chunk plays and capable of doing that, like with Dotson, that will keep them going. Wisconsin's offense they've got to move past the idea that you can play the 5 yards in a cloud of dust and win that way in the RPO world. I just don't. It's possible to shut down a running game, and a good defense will do it.
Defensive resurrection this season. I think I've seen enough towards the tail end of last season and week 0 and 1 this season to feel like defenses are finally adjusting a little bit to the shock that was the RPO spread leaving the Big 12 and really going everywhere. I feel like we are coming back in a good way, regressing to the mean, to where, like I always said, I miss the days of like a 24-28 kind of game being the norm for the big games. I think maybe we're getting there. What do you think?
I think so. Teams have picked up on some things that they can use to slow down the RPO. You're not going to ever be able to fully slow it down. And for maybe a lot of people don't actually fully know the rule change. So it was in 2009. It used to be that you could block, and if you engaged within a yard, you could block up to 3 yards after engaged in college football. So you had to block the guy within a yard, and then you could carry him for 2 more yards, and it didn't count as a legal man downfield. And what they did is they changed it to be you could be up to 3 yards downfield, period, because they said it was too hard to enforce otherwise. And so it took about a decade for, like, half the decade was 5 years of figuring out, wait, that breaks the game because now we can do these other things where the linemen get to be 3 yards downfield no matter what. And then another 5 years of them trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we deal with it? The zone RPO game, which is what like Maryland uses with Loxley, and what Alabama used in 2018, Clemson in 2018 kind of figured out some things, and a lot of people have copied it. And now what you're seeing is more Lincoln Riley stuff, which is more power football with RPO built in, and it is shifted back a little bit. Like, you can't just use the RPO and light someone up. Now the RPO makes offenses more effective, where you can't completely stop someone anymore, especially if they're elite. But you can slow them down a little more, and the things that were completely unstoppably broken have gone away a little bit. Outside the top 6, is there any team that could break into the playoff? I want to note something related to this, and I'll let you pick it up. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the term El Assico, but it's the Iowa State game is often called El Assico, which is usually because it's like this weird big rivalry, and there's this whole history behind it. And it's usually a game where one or both teams are pretty terrible, and it's almost unwatchable. We are going to have a high-level ranked El Assico. It's going to be 2 top 15 teams. And the winner of El Assico is going to be a dark horse playoff candidate. That would have been unfathomable 5 years ago. So I just wanted to point that out.
So I would say the answer to this question has to be Cincinnati. Because
Yeah.
I was not beating Ohio State, which means they're not going to get in the playoffs. And teams outside the top 6 right now, all for the most part, have been kind of crappy, right? Like we saw a lot of mediocre football today by ranked teams, and that might sort itself out throughout the year to where someone who looked really shaky today ends up being 9-3, but that's not a playoff team. The only team that's kind of outside of that window for me is Cincinnati, because they have a runway. They have a margin for error where they can have a bad day and not lose. And they have shown to be able to just carpet bomb some of these really bad G5 teams. And they have 2 Power 5 teams on their schedule, one of which has pretty good brand pedigree this year. So for me, it's Cincinnati. And I think that's probably going to be the last question of the night. Josh, any final thoughts before we mercifully get you to sleep?
Yeah. Somebody brought up Texas A&M. I actually didn't think Texas A&M looked great in their game against Kent State. They rolled late in that game when Kent State depth gave out, but early in the game, I'm still kind of concerned that they don't have as much explosive skill players as you'd think. I mean, they recruit pretty well, but I look at the roster and I watch them play, and I feel like, yeah, Anaya Smith's really good, and yeah, Isaiah Spiller's really good, but I don't feel like I see 4 receivers that really threaten you. And I didn't feel like the quarterback play was quite what I was hoping it would be too. So that's one we haven't really talked about, but in the discussion of who's going to beat Alabama as an assistant, to me, it feels like A&M is always going to be in purgatory where they're going to constantly lose to Alabama by like 15 points. It's like they're cursed from beating them in 2012, but I don't really feel like that's changing. I don't know why. I just don't.
And Westside Bear, don't overreact. Doesn't mean Auburn's going to be bad. Just it's Akron. I actually, based on what I saw from Penn State, I give Auburn a better shot than I gave them before the games played out today. Big Variable is here to overreact. All right, y'all. We are 3 minutes shy of 3 hours of a live show. Someone said earlier tonight it was a great chat as well. We didn't get to all of the chat, but the chat was awesome. I kept an eye on it all night. And if y'all want to hear this show in its entirety, I'm going to post this on Spotify, and it'll be on Google Play and Apple as well later this week. And it'll give you something to listen to on your commute, because we did roll for 3 hours, and that's a lot of content. So I know I don't like sitting in traffic with nothing to listen to. So
and then the replay of it'll be on YouTube as well, right?
Yeah, the replay will be on YouTube. But this chat you'll be able to see it in the video. That's why we do the overlay. And y'all were actually tamed tonight, so I don't think we'll get like demonetized or anything. But this does kind of lend itself to the podcast form. And also, we're going to record tomorrow night and churn out 4 or 5 videos for you as well this week. We're here for this season. We're excited. So thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.